Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Oliver hated being called a bum, a beggar, or a tramp. He preferred the socially neutral term free artist. He had felt that way long before he had been on the street. What was he, really, a bum? It was just that living within four walls was weighing him down. Besides, he really was an artist. Once his paintings were popular and in demand. In those glorious times, he even held several chamber exhibitions in small galleries. A dozen critics called the work significant, and a couple more disgusting ointment. At that moment, the artist didn't care what some underachievers said about him. Customers paid off solid fees for portraits, which Oliver, in his own apt expression, wrote the heel of a jackleg. It is not that he bathed in money, but the need did not know, and enjoyed widespread fame in narrow circles. However, fortune is a capricious girl, and after many years of upsurge, after worldly fame and relative wealth, can always come a period of oblivion. For Oliver, that time dragged on. First, he sent a gallery owner on a pedestrian journey who tolerated all his antics and picked up customers. Here's what George, the artist, said that day. "You're literally stealing from me. You're forcing me into some kind of channel where I'm cramped. I'm going free, do you hear me?" What George said, Oliver couldn't remember. Then he proudly slammed the door, leaving his apartment. He left his shamed wife and children, who by then were relatively mature and tired of his antics, and went on a free voyage. At first, everything was fine. His own studio, clients, sitters, and wine, a whole sea of wine, in which he began to choke every now and then. "You'll come back to me." Helga, his lawfully wedded wife, shouted at him as he left with a small suitcase. "You'll come crawling back on your knees." "I will," Oliver replied with a smile. "That's what you were before me, huh? Just a little shop girl. And now, an artist's wife. Sounds proud, doesn't it?" As he left Helga, the free artist smiled. He never fought at all, cutting bridges. It's just that life in one marriage, in one gallery, was weighing on him, especially all these conventions, to sleep at home, to be faithful to his wife, not to bring to the apartment of favorite women, not to sell Nojeko paintings to random customers, and not to exhibit in other galleries. Of course, the wife could tolerate this at the beginning of their life together. Oliver's lifestyle seemed to her bohemian and suing respect. She also saw him as a genius, but gradually the free-spirited artist became too voluminous a figure for their modest third-floor apartment. There were high ceilings of more than 3 meters, but even that was not enough for the flight of the soul. The gallery, which brought him a good income, also became too cramped. He saw himself as a rising star of world painting, but the outlines were ghostly. He was going to conquer Paris, Berlin, Madrid, one by one. And he would have, if it hadn't been for a morbid addiction to alcohol. So he left both the gallery and the apartment, where he even thought of going out of the window. But the third floor is too small for that flight, which sometimes allow themselves to make a saturated life creators. That's why Oliver went out not through the window, but through the door, and has been wandering the world for 10 years. "You are not a bum," said to him another acquaintance over a bottle of cheap wine. "You're the best artist in the world." "No," Oliver replied flirtatiously. "The best, but not in the world, but in the country." "You're a genius," continued the acquaintance, enjoying a drink at someone else's expense. "No, not at all," objected the artist. "I am not a genius, but outstanding, but only to find my paints, brushes, and sketches." Casual acquaintances did not stay with him longer than there was money left for food and drink. The older Oliver got, the worse his teeth and hair looked. The fewer women became willing to take him in and model for him. And now the thought of returning to Helga didn't seem quite so frightening anymore. Especially since he knew that half of the apartment still belonged to him, and that he could find a job as a decorator, or a painter at the worst. He could work with large volumes and liked it too, but his pride wouldn't let him. This quality, without which it is unthinkable to achieve success in any field, is gradually becoming a yoke, a burden that dragged him to the bottom, into a pool of wine and vices. That morning, the chief physician's anxiety was at its peak. His best quality is intuition. It worked well in diagnosis, but it did not help at all in management. He had an intuitive sense of what a person was like, but he didn't always understand what to do about it. So when the phone rang in his office, he already realized that he would not hear any good news. "Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to you," the velvet voice on the other end of the wire did without preamble, and did not tolerate objections. "Really?" Andrew perked up. "Why?" "You are unable to clean up the hospital," the voice said. "Our orders have not been executed for months." "I dare to disagree," said the chief physician, loosening his tie. In principle, if he was going to argue with the caller, it was only for pro forma. In fact, he was glad of the unexpected freedom. The hospital was in perfect order. The occupancy rate is less than 90%. The recurrence rate is very low. "How long will you put up with the ritual store near the main entrance?" the voice asked. "How many complaints do we have to listen to before we reach your mind? Or at least your heart? What does it mean to tolerate?" The former chief physician was perplexed. A ritual store for the hospital is quite a thing. Their people can buy everything they need if something goes wrong, and in general, what are you implying? "Me?" the voice interjected. "You should have told me that a month ago." Silence. Andrew really couldn't and didn't like to lead. All affairs were handled by his deputies, to whom he gave full freedom of action. In fact, he was the one who started the funeral parlor of some shrewd businessman. But the hospital received money for the rent, and also, according to Andrew's firm belief, the proximity of such an institution should discipline the patients. "I'm giving you one last chance," the voice said. "I was persuaded to fire you for incompatibility with your position, but you understand. You won't be able to. I get the hint." Andrew reported cheerfully. "It's easy. I'll write a letter right now, but don't forget that I am a materially responsible person. To whom will I transfer the household? What if the new person is missing something?" "For this, do not worry," assured the voice. "Make an inventory and leave the business. The new head doctor is not your concern." The voice hung up. Andrew sighed. This is not how he had imagined his departure. In fact, it's even better. There would be no proceedings, lavish send-offs and tears of longing. He would write a statement, leave his keys and goodbye. He couldn't wait to get back to practicing medicine. Better yet, to go to some remote village with 10 houses and treat there. That's where the life is. That's where the real challenges are. To lead a large hospital he liked at first, but gradually all the pleasure came to naught. Half the time all he did was sign papers and deal with the complaints of disgruntled patients. "Christopher," Andrew said, pressing the call button. "Christopher, dance. You're going to have a new boss. The weather can be nice in September, but it's best not to take any chances. That's why Oliver wore a raincoat. You never know when it's going to start raining." Winter was coming soon, so the free artist had to find a temporary home. He had an option in mind. His once good friend, whom he called not an artist, but a craftsman. To ask him for help, he had to step on his own pride. After making his way to the private sector, he went through the open gate without a bell and knocked on the door of the cottage. After a couple of minutes of waiting, a friend appeared in the doorway, and his face could not be called pleased. "Hello, Vance," Oliver said courteously and bowed, standing on the doorstep to his longtime friend. "Long time no see, friend. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. I'll see if you've restored the gazebo that I destroyed last time due to my gross negligence." "What do you want?" the man answered rudely. "Are you trying to make a pig of me again? Or a whole pig farm, eh?" With Vance in the past, They had a long-standing collaboration. Both artists, they had taken very different paths. If Oliver was really looking for concentrated freedom, Vance was looking for enrichment. If Oliver was in demand with women and drew inspiration from them, Vance was never really loved. This information, of course, had to be kept in mind and kept to himself. But the free artist could not. At the last creative evening, which rolled into a banal feast, Oliver told Vance everything he thought about him. He did not keep silent about the greed of his comrade, who not a dozen times helped him financially. And lastly, he burned the carved arbor, admiring the flames of his favorite element. It was about 6 months ago, and since then the entrance to the hospitable house of the old comrade was closed. "I should like to spend the night," Oliver asked, as if nothing had happened. "To go to your bathhouse. I'd like to make pies on your charming stove. By the way, did you put the tandoor together like you dreamed?" "That's a wrap," Vance replied, not leaving the doorway. Oliver was looking for a way to get ahead, to sit on the living room couch, and then God himself wouldn't be able to kick him out. "Why don't you put my youngest daughter in the bed? To keep your old bones warm?" Considering the age of the artists, and each of them is close to the 6'10", the proposal did not seem so vulgar, and the daughter is long since matured and overripe. She was 30, and Vance had given up hope of getting her out of her creative home and into someone else's marriage. "I'm sorry, friend," Oliver said. "I overreacted that time. I was wrong, I was rude, I was unfriendly. I let down a man I should have been proud to know, and I. The artist rolled his eyes and raised the elbow of his hand to his face, depicting sincere remorse. "Really?" Vance marveled, shifting to a whisper. "Only that time? Or do you only think of my friendship when you need a place to sleep and a drink?" "Well, and all the times before that," agreed the free artist. "Yes, you're right. I don't know how to value either friendship or love. I've betrayed 100 times the people I should have held on to. There must be a flaw in my soul, somewhere in my heart, a little demon that's undermining me from the inside." My God, what a speech. Vance admired him insincerely and splashed his hands. "But I've lost count of the number of times you've said something like that. 10? 20? It's about time you thought of something else." "Vance, you have to understand," Oliver pleaded. "Winter is coming, and I have nowhere to go. So you want to stay with me again until spring? Is that why you've come all this way, clopping around in your worn-out boots?" "Of course," Oliver rejoiced. He took the rough tone as an unspoken agreement. "We'll have a great time. I'll write a dozen pieces for you. You can sell them and make good money. My name is still remembered and my paintings are waiting, right?" Of course, Oliver was being dishonest. He'd started several mediums in his friend's studio at his own request, but he'd never finished a single one. And given his specific technique, it was unlikely that anyone had managed to complete the projects. Besides, Oliver flatly refused to paint exactly what the master of the house demanded, and the resulting smudge would hardly sell for good money, if at all. "Don't spoil my canvases and paints." Vance was indignant. He was ready to forgive his comrade once again, but the mention of unfulfilled orders was the last straw. He was the one who had to work day and night in the workshop to meet the deadline. He was such an overly obliging man. "For the love of God, please don't touch the brushes in my house." "So you're letting me in?" Oliver asked with a smile. He interpreted Vance's mood in his own way. "I could tell you a lot of things, you know, but you're better with your tongue. I could never do that." "So just, no," the former comrade said and slammed the door loudly in Oliver's face. This world had never been so cruel to a freelance artist. If even his best friend left him alone on the cold streets, who could he rely on? Of course he was unfair to Vance. Too often, he called him a lowlife, a talentless person, an imitator, an opportunist, a canvasser, mocked his commissioned canvases, laughed at the way Vance himself makes frames with a mitre saw and thus extracts an extra penny from the order. Emptied his home bar with such speed that the owner had to hide wine and cognac in hiding places on the plot. But Evan nodded with restraint, though his medical sense told him that he would not like this big official's offer. Since he had poured a bucket of flattery on him, he was about to be asked to do something that he wouldn't do in his right mind. Which, in principle, you could refuse, but I don't think you came all this way just to give me a favorable review, Evan said. Though I do appreciate being seen and recognized for my efforts. Right? Jack smiled. What if I told you that a small but very affluent town needed a chief physician? A well-known cardiac hospital. Evan immediately grew sad. There were many hospitals on the map of his vast homeland. Where things were going well, chief physicians could lead for decades, and where there were problems, the chiefs changed periodically. And where there hadn't been a real owner for a long time, it was hard to build a system from scratch. What city? Evan asked, even though he already knew what we were talking about. The city you know best, Jack smiled. The city that gave us such a promising and brilliant doctor. No, Evan cut him off. I'm definitely not going there. The smile never left Jack's face. An experienced official, he knew which strings to pull, which keys to press to get the right tune. And if the doctor couldn't be bribed with flattery, he had to use the heavy artillery. It's something he knew and loved. Rumor has it, the official yawned, that you can't find texture for your work. Work? Evan was surprised. Well, with good results. Jack stretched out, with the right persistence. Damn it, nothing is impossible in this world, my dear colleague. In two, Evan repeated in a tone that brooked no objection, and I'll be challenged by someone who actually knows medicine, not a pretender. 2 years, the official savored these words like an expensive wine. Will you really have time, my dear colleague? And will I have time to convince everyone? I'll work nights. In that case, Jack's smile became even wider, which seemed contrary to anatomy. In that case, we need to discuss the details and choose a date on which you're ready to begin your duties. I'll turn in my files and get to work. Friday at the latest. The official stood up, adjusting his jacket. Evan hated healthcare workers who favored formal dress. He himself always wore what he was comfortable in. That's what you can do to help a patient in a jacket and white shirt. One last thing, muttered the official. Start working at the hospital by looking for new deputies. The ones we have are no good, if you say so. After his conversation with Jack, Evan felt as if he'd done something immoral. Should he have accepted a transfer to another hospital, even if it was as chief of medicine? He cherished the hope that as soon as he became a candidate of medical sciences, he would immediately break into the vertical of medical power and bring order there, so that hospitals and polyclinics would receive not only criticism, but also equipment and medicines. Still, the feeling was sickening. Why had he said he was coming to the new place on Friday? What was the rush? It was already Wednesday. Evan went to the smoking room he'd been avoiding for a year and a half. And there he met the man whose help he needed right now. Give him a smoke, he asked Carlo, his friend and longtime colleague. You quit, the doctor replied, taking a cigarette out of the pack. Yes, Evan agreed, lighting up, and picked it up again. I'm transferred. Tomorrow is the last day. Will now be the head doctor. I heard that, Carlo smiled. Rumors have been going around the hospital for a week. Congratulations. The smoke burned his lungs. Why is he the last to hear the news? When the big official from the Ministry of Health had announced his arrival, he had already suspected the possibility of a promotion, but he wasn't sure. Carlo could have at least hinted at it. I'm not happy about it. I've always dreamed of being a chief physician, but not in this hospital. Any reason? Carlo asked. Yes, there are. Deeply personal. Is it a lot of work? No, Evan shook his head. There's a patient there, you know. One I don't want to cross paths with. Patient? Carlo was surprised. Where are you and where are the patients, Evan? Are you going to celebrate the promotion or not? Only in a small circle, a very small circle. Cars were passing by, but they didn't care about a homeless man about to throw himself off a bridge. No one even slowed down to shout encouragement. After the foot got stiff, the free artist put it on the ground. Now they had to wait for the cramp to pass. In half an hour, only one patrol car had stopped near Oliver. The bridge, spanning high over the river, was the main attraction of the area. The water gave Oliver inspiration, and he had once painted a series of landscapes depicting the enchanting place. "Come on, jump," Thomas demanded it. "Jump. The whole town will breathe a sigh of relief. I'll keep going." The police inspector, if he followed all the instructions, was supposed to stall and dissuade suicides from jumping into the abyss, and also to furtively call a psychologist so as not to provoke the person to take decisive action. But Thomas had deviated from the instructions by 180 degrees. He was fed up with the antics of Oliver, who thought he was a brilliant artist. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "I didn't have time," the artist replied. "Then fly away. How long am I going to stand here and cheer you up?" At this time of year, the vagrant usually left the city and went to winter in warmer places. And there he'd piss off the local police with his inability to live in society. This year it's all gone wrong, which means trouble and more work. Thomas was being ironic when he suggested that the artist jump, but it was a joke about his secret desires. "You've got to stall me," Oliver objected, as if you don't know the instructions. "I do," Thomas replied. "I know, that's why I'm going to confront you while no one is looking. Come here, come closer." Oliver was always messing up the townspeople's lives, mostly with his words and vulgar pictures, which the artist considered masterpieces. And it would be all right if the tramp did something serious and disappeared from sight for a long time. Thomas knew from experience that in penitentiaries there was a high demand for those who could draw. No, the antics would be of a kind that could not be expected to last for a long sentence of 15 days at most. The free artist did not argue with the guardian and stepped away from the low railing. He raised his hands, showing that he realized his mistake and changed his mind. "I understand," he replied. "I get it. Thanks to your heartfelt words, Thomas, I have decided to abandon my shameful scheme and continue to bring bright colors to this gray earth. Can you give me a ride to the hospital?" "All right, get in," Thomas nodded. "Only on the paper. And don't ever leave the hospital. Do you hear me?" Fall is deceiving. The homeless know it especially well. You can be sweltering hot during the day and freezing cold at night. In their city, the range of temperatures was extremely wide, and while during the day in September some people managed to sunbathe and even swim a little in the river, at night the frost on the grass or car windows could turn to ice. That was why Oliver wanted so badly to wait out the months ahead. Otherwise, October would have to be spent in some basement or attic. For a while after his wife left him, he had a workshop that was supposed to be heated with a wood stove. Oliver had been told 100 times that the wood should be loaded into the furnace gradually, not to heat the stove to red hot. But what do these people know about art? Once, when he had a session with a charming model, he overdid it. The model wouldn't let go of her bra until the temperature in the studio was close to acceptable levels. So he loaded the stove to the limit and splashed kerosene to be sure. Of course, that house did not burn down. The fireman, who immediately arrived at the call and thoroughly doused the hearth of the fire, prevented it. But all 5 floors below the attic were seriously damaged by water. Not only his work, but also his pride died in this element. So when the frost comes, he'll have to seek survival in the basement. "When I was in jail," liked to tell the artist after this incident. In fact, for violation of fire safety, he was arrested for only 15 days. Some hotheads at the time wanted to make the artist pay, but what can you take from him? Since then, Oliver was panic-stricken by Borgias, preferring to warm himself with firewater. The artist liked the cardiac hospital. The main building was 8 stories high, and not only locals were sent here. There is always someone to talk, fight, and drink with. Excellent canteen. If you know how to be persistent, they'll feed you well. The appearance was somewhat spoiled by the proximity of the ritual store. It was located in an annex near the main building, as if to suggest that it was waiting for patients who were not ready to follow the doctor's recommendations. Oliver didn't mind the proximity, for he wasn't afraid of death. He would have to wait out the future frosts, hold out a little, and then the strait would be waiting. Alas, the medical registrar was not inclined to share his aspirations. "Patient, keep order," the woman asked. For 10 minutes now, she had been trying to explain to the free artist that becoming a hospital patient was not so simple. "We shouldn't hospitalize you without a referral. Don't hold up the line or I'll be forced to call security." She's new, isn't she? The threat made no impression on Oliver. As soon as the guard saw the troublemaker, he hid in his booth and just watched through a slit in the ground. Near the registrar's office, there was a decent queue. The artist was preventing those who really needed help from getting it. "And I say, you should not, but obliged to hospitalize me," shouted Oliver. "My health is disgusting. Look how my hands are trembling." The artist stretched out his palm. The tremor was visible to the naked eye. However, after so many years of drinking and wandering, it was a relatively minor problem. It was worse when it came to filling his stomach. Oliver hadn't had a poppy in his mouth since morning, and he was hungry and thirsty. "Man, I've told you for the last time, it's not allowed," the receptionist replied patiently. "First get a referral in the district polyclinic, then undergo an examination, take tests, and then welcome to the hospital. I do not have so much time," pathetically shouted Oliver. I'm dying. I need immediate, urgent care." "Next," said the receptionist, and turned away from the free artist. The angry crowd shifted the old man to the very edge of the counter. Outraged, Oliver was still making noise and swearing for a long time. He said that he had given himself to this city and people by immortalizing them both on dozens of canvases. Claimed he'd ruined his heart by worrying about the future of the locals. Like Michelangelo, he spent nights in the studio creating masterpieces, ruining his eyesight. He asked at least for free food vouchers in the canteen. But the crowd didn't listen to him and lived their own lives. "I'll complain," Oliver said finally, stopping at the guard's booth. "I'll go to the head doctor, then come back tomorrow," the man said. "There's a new head doctor on Friday, and we'll see if he'll listen to you." "Who said that?" the painter asked. The voice sounded familiar to him. But there was no one in the booth, not even after Oliver had bent over to look inside. "No one," the guard answered, continuing to hide. "No one said there's no one here. Just go already. The sanitarium is cancelled." And when the artist had moved a safe distance away, the guard rose and added, "That Walker. Modern genius. Damn him." It was not a flight, however, but a diversion, for Oliver was not going to surrender without a fight. Retreating to the main entrance, he made one last attempt to storm the building. It was a busy Thursday afternoon outside the hospital. If he faked a heart attack believably enough, he'd be admitted to the hospital. It's all about believing himself. What does a heart attack look like? As he stepped out onto the porch, Oliver suddenly shrieked, putting all his artistry into his voice and movements. "Help! People! Help me! I'm dying! Oh, farewell, motherland!" and collapsed on his knees. Apparently, the sudden action, hunger and forced sobriety had made him really dizzy. Oliver felt that he really didn't feel well, began to gulp air like a fish. The sounds began to drift away, and the picture first turned green and then dim. He grasped the handrail with all his might, but his weakened fingers couldn't manage it. "Is he ill?" the woman questioned, standing in front of the free artist. "Is he really ill?" "Coldly, citizen, coldly," said the guard. He ran up to Oliver with the most experienced man, the local Zaphos, the deputy chief physician on the economic part. "Now the doctor will say." "Calm down, I'm a doctor," said the storekeeper and pretended to check his pulse. The man knew Oliver all too well. The free artist had spent a couple of years in the ward on his floor, turning the model ward into an artistic commune. And then he'd kept himself discharged for a long time, faking heart attacks every now and then. When the superintendent took the homeless man's dirty hand, ostensibly to check his pulse, he immediately wanted to disinfect his palms. "Pulse is fine," the man said to the crowd. He didn't want to check the rest of his body. "He's just a faker who's gonna make normal people run out of room in the hospital. You grab the legs, I'll grab the arms." The guard and the storekeeper dragged the beggar around the corner, where he was much less visible. "It's nothing," Christopher thought. "He'll lie down for a while and then he'll be gone." However, how he has got into the part. Indeed, Oliver did not utter a sound as they dragged him, though the way was a decent distance. The artist's head was thrown back, so the men had to be careful. "What's the matter, imposter?" said the bolder guard as they laid Oliver down on the pavement. "Nothing to say, faker." The artist only mumbled something unintelligible. His consciousness hadn't left him, but it was very foggy, and even the feeling of resentment toward those who should have helped and saved him was dulled. He thought that if it was death, it was no big deal. It wasn't painful at all, and it was hardly scary at all. He had always dreamed of meeting a creator and asking his opinion of his own works, whether they were masterpieces or cheesy. There are several reasons why a person does not want to return to his hometown. The main one is the potential meeting with people you don't want to see at all. Evan is fully committed to medicine, a noble endeavor, and he's been dedicated. Cardiology is one of the most challenging fields, but it's also one of the most promising. Starting a new patient was like walking through a minefield, but a mistake here cost the life not the doctor, but his ward. After all, more people die from heart and blood pressure problems than from armed conflicts. It wasn't just about saving lives. The cardiovascular system fascinated the doctor so much that he saw it as a model of the universe. Evan could talk for hours about how this organ is organized, why people suffocate, and how important it is to keep healthy. But his passion for medicine had a downside. At 35, he had nothing besides a dizzying career. No hobbies, no home, no wife, no children. Loneliness sometimes burdened, but there was no shortage of potential female admirers. The reason for loneliness and reluctance to return to his hometown are closely connected. His entire childhood was spent in the constant scandals of his mother and father. In the end, his father left, loudly slamming the door, which his mother has never forgiven him. Yes, Dad's temper was too difficult, but Mom wasn't exactly easygoing either. "So, Carlo," Evan said, filling small glasses with cognac. "Let's not drink too much, it's a lot of strain on the heart." "Come on," replied his colleague and former subordinate. "Once a week is fine." "Carlo, you're upsetting me," Evan said, deliberately serious. Cognac can be consumed only in small doses, savoring the noble drink, and monitor your blood pressure and liver function. It sounds like a toast. Carlo smiled and sipped from his glass. On the occasion of the transfer, Evan unsealed a bottle of rare and expensive cognac, which was given to him by a grateful patient. "I envy you," Evan sighed. "You have everything, and a wife, and a son, and a daughter, and most importantly, no ambition. You don't want to be the head of the department or the deputy chief physician. What's your secret?" "It's simple, Evan," Carlo answered. "Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Well, you'll make indicators to the ministry. You'll get the work done. You'll reduce the death rate. You can do it, Evan. I don't doubt it for a second. What's in it for you? You're just gonna hand your skills over to these frames. Your last name, your genes?" Carlo pointed to a wall hung with certificates of appreciation and diplomas. Certificates from the many courses Evan had attended crowded around it. If they were to be believed, there was simply no field in cardiology that didn't lend itself to a talented physician. "You're wrong," Evan said, filling his glasses. "I'm not doing all this for the ministry. I'm doing it for me. I'll get my dissertation and then I'll live. I'll get married." "I don't believe it." Carlo shook his head. "Why do you need a wife? You know how to do everything yourself. I think you could take out an appendix yourself, like the polar explorers, and without anesthesia." "Well, you're overdoing it here," waved his hand. I'll have kids. You need to choose a wife from pediatrics or nurses." They sat for 2 more hours, remembering cases from their rich medical practice. 3 years flew by like a day. Evan didn't stay anywhere for long, because moving around was easy for him. If you don't have a home or family, it's easy to move. It's all about moving up and moving forward. The main thing he had learned from his father was to hold back against his will. There were so many times in his life when he wanted to say what he thought about the other person. To humiliate, to hurt, to ironize. But medicine teaches you to spare other people's feelings, reminding you every day that you don't last forever. Evan gave himself exactly 1 day for handoffs and packing. That should be enough time to carefully pack his certificates and commendations in one box and his things in another. The departure from the physical shell took longer. Lying on the cold ground, the free artist continued to feel the breath of the wind, and a bug bit his finger painfully. But the old man did not move and stubbornly waited for the transition to a new dimension, which he had been waiting for so long. As soon as the last of his strength left Oliver, an angel flew down to him. "Look, it's him. Walker," a girl's voice called out. "It's him." Oliver opened his eyes wide. No, it wasn't an angel, it was a girl. There was a boy with her, too, who was not quite as expressive. They were walking together in a strange city, as adventurers should. And judging by the fact that he had never seen this couple on the streets before, they were newcomers. Yes, the color and identity seekers sometimes wandered into their town. "Help," Oliver asked. "Help me sit down." "Are you really Walker?" The girl wouldn't stop. "I did a term paper on your painting." "Really?" nodded the artist. The guys sat him down and leaned him against the wall. "Drink." The girl obligingly held out a bottle of water, but Oliver shook his head negatively and pointed to the hand of the guy who was sipping a beer. "When you come to a foreign city, everything tastes better here, even this vulgar drink." The young man thought for a moment, but gave the bottle to the old man. He literally sucked on the neck and poured every last drop into himself. "Oliver, are you sick?" the girl asked. It turns out that not just rare tourists, but those who are interested in art, have wandered into their city, and in the nameless homeless man lying near the picturesque street, recognized the artist. "Should I call a doctor?" No, my soul," Oliver replied. He was pleased to be known and remembered. "Lying here in the shadow of the street, I've been gauging perspective. I was looking for inspiration for my new paintings. You see," said the young man, addressing the angelic girl who couldn't get past Walker himself. "I told you, it's just a bum lying around. And you, bad for the artist, bad for the artist." "Peter, what are you?" the girl hissed at him. "You're embarrassing me." "Do not pay attention, it's just a joke." These words were already addressed to a new acquaintance, which she had previously seen only on the pages of a rare catalogue of paintings. "It's nothing. Artists quickly get used to criticism," Oliver said, although Peter's words hurt him. "How did you recognize me, my soul?" "There is only one famous artist in this city," shrugged the girl. "Besides, I remembered that ring on my index finger right away." Oliver looked at his hand. Indeed, his talisman, his trademark, had accompanied him throughout his career, both during his rapid rise and during his endless fall. The red stone looked like a sapphire caught in the clutches of course," answered the artist without a shadow of embarrassment. A complete exclusive. The rise and fall of Oliver Walker. Interested? The naked eye could see that the guy did not like the idea very much, but he'd come from far away, come at random, so he was ready for adventure at heart. Peter had no idea why this bum in dirty clothes his girlfriend called an artist, but in order not to quarrel, he was ready to tolerate the society of a strange man, especially since he looked harmless. Oh, that deceptive appearance. "We could use a guide," he said peacefully. "And don't worry about a glass of wine. We can let you have a bottle." "Really, Leslie?" "I don't think artists drink," said the angelic-looking girl. "Isn't that right, Mr. Walker?" "It's true, Leslie," Oliver nodded. "I hate those alcoholic liquids. I have to take them solely to induce inspiration in my soul, and to make peace with the imperfections of the world around me." Things are neatly folded and organized in drawers. Letters of gratitude and certificates disappeared from the walls as if they didn't exist at all. The former head physician looked absent-mindedly at the inventory and understood nothing at all. In fact, he contemplated the figures only to avoid giving the impression of an incompetent person. "The paperwork seems to be fine," Andrew stretched out. "Are you leaving already?" Christopher, the author and executor of the inventory, asked obligingly. Even a dozen Ingalls would not be enough to uncover all his machinations. Not even coffee. "No, thank you," replied the former chief physician, "and we will not convene the staff. Now we'll sign the documents, and that's it." The deputy chief physician was really upset. How will he live without this nice and completely talentless head? How will he pull off scams and receive public and invisible support? Now the former chief physician refused the farewell banquet, although he had every right to do so. He's understandable. "Why were you fired?" Christopher asked in an innocent voice. He knew the reason, of course. "Oh, Christopher, it's like in a marriage," Andrew replied seriously. "It's a bad temper." "But not with his wife." "Oh, Christopher," said the former head doctor. The words of the deputy, that he is now a nobody, somewhat hurt. But by and large, they were fair. "I think I'll rest for a while. You know, running an institution like this is hard work. Anything else you need me to sign?" Christopher was thinking about how wonderful it would be to run a hospital. There's still a lot of areas where a good businessman hasn't stepped foot. But there was one small barrier between him and being head of the hospital. Small but insurmountable, at least at this stage of Christopher's career. The tour of the city was a kilometre-long road from the hospital to Morbulus's cafe. And what else could Oliver show these young, uneducated tourists? Referring to the fact that they were going to have a long walk, the free artist offered to refresh themselves, but not to drink alcohol under any circumstances. Supposedly, it makes tourism lose its elitism. The cafe, Morbulus's, was located in the basement of an old building. There was a terrific atmosphere, for which the place was loved by both locals and guests. The good weather only enhanced the feeling of a wonderful mood. Nearby was a charming fountain with a boy and a goose, another attraction. "Can't we even have a glass of beer?" Peter asked in surprise. "Absolutely not," Oliver objected eagerly. "Although the Morbulus has its own brewery, that's no reason to confuse alcoholism with tourism." "Is it real?" Leslie asked incredulously. "Or do they just dilute the concentrate and refrigerate it?" "It's the real thing," said the artist. "I dedicated a cityscape to this marvelous equipment. Would you like to check?" Oliver suggested a seat on the terrace. The weather was glorious, and he hoped that his dirty clothes would not give off an unpleasant odor here and spoil the mood of his unexpected sponsors. They took the large table the artist had pointed out to them. He himself positioned himself so that the waiter would not notice him until the last. When Mickey, the cafe worker, approached, he immediately put his hands to his sides. "You got your listeners again?" he asked, looking at Oliver. "What do you think you're doing, young man?" The artist was indignant. "My new companions have traveled a long way to enjoy the beauty of this city. I demand that their order be fulfilled as a matter of priority." "Who's paying?" Mickey asked unceremoniously. "We are paying," replied Peter with a smile. He must have misunderstood the waiter's aggression and thought it was some kind of elaborate game. "Mr. Walker said that they serve excellent beer here. We'd like to try the freshest." "Yes, bring 3 glasses of dark and 3 of light," Leslie asked. "Oh wait, you'll drink to meeting us too, won't you, Oliver?" "Well," the artist drummed his fingers on the table, "only if you insist. But then I'd asked for more wings. These wings are great." So the waiter summarized, 3 glasses of light, 3 glasses of dark and wings. 3 servings, Peter said. "We can put down a deposit." "That won't be necessary," Mickey smiled. "Right away. I hope you know what you're doing, young people." Oliver really found an appreciative audience. A boy and a girl listened to his stories about how masterpieces were created. Anticipating a brilliant drink, he immediately became a goldsmith. The planning horizon of a beggar is narrowed down to one day, and if the future in this perspective is rosy, then you can relax. The day dissolved imperceptibly in the rays of sunset, and beer smoothly passed into fortified wine. The tourists were quite tipsy, but the free artist could not boast of sobriety either. At such moments, he forgot that he had long ago lost his studio, lost his brushes and paints, and slipped to the bottom of life. He was awakening in him the very artist who, thanks to the efforts of unknown authors, got into the anthologies of creativity. "So when are we going?" Leslie asked. "To see the city? I could use a stretch." "You didn't stretch enough, my soul." The artist asked me sympathetically. "Waiter." No, I've had enough alcohol." The girl waved her hands. "I'm not even sure I can go." The incomparable Leslie. The hop unleashed Oliver not only his tongue, but also his sinful thoughts. "Have you ever done any modeling?" He, "No," smiled the girl. "Why, am I suitable?" "Of course," the artist said eagerly. "You can write anything, even an angel or a femme fatale. There are such universal types that—" And Oliver went into a long story about how many models he'd had in his life. Leslie's cheeks reddened from the savory details, and Peter's fists grew leaden. He watched with anger as the low-down bum picked on his girlfriend right in front of his eyes, and she didn't seem to mind the attention. "Listen, Mr. Nemtsov." "Finally," Peter said. "Walker," corrected the artist and smiled disgustedly. "Never mind. I think you've had enough to drink, and we've had enough of your drunken company. And you're not a very good guide either." The guy's diction, despite the amount of alcohol he drank, was clear. He only began to pull the vowels, as if he was trying to speak in a chant. The fact that the artist was intoxicated was evident only by his sly eyes and increasingly swaggering behavior. "So, listen to me," said Oliver, finishing his 3rd bottle of fortified wine. "You're a good-looking, handsome man, but you don't even know how to live." "Me?" Peter asked again. He had had less to drink, but he had not had much experience in this business either. And this old man, who was only trying to humiliate him, was getting on his nerves. "Do you think that if Leslie had a choice, she would be with you? A man stupid and uncreative, would she have been with you? No, she'd leave. She'd go to an artist for emotion, for feeling. To someone who could give her not a new phone, but a storm of unrivaled feelings, immortalize her beauty on canvases, and that was the last straw." While Oliver continued his denunciation, the young man stood up, grabbed the artist, and threw him into the fountain with the chair. In flight, the artist experienced a feeling of lightness and longing. It was as if it was happening not to him, but to another person, and not in reality, but in a dream. After the splash of water on the terrace, there was a sepulchral silence. It was broken by Mickey's applause. "Brilliant," said the waiter. "The establishment will gladly give you a discount of 20% off the final check." It seemed to Paul that Oliver had gone to the bottom and was not coming out. Several customers ran up to the fountain to help the unfortunate man. Leslie seemed ready to fall through the ground from shame and embarrassment. Evan looked around the office to see if he'd forgotten anything important. It looked like he'd taken everything. Thanks to this madhouse, let's go to another one. For several years, he had been working as the head of the cardiology department, angry at someone, hoping for something. And now he was going to conquer a new peak. Evan was sure that one day he would be able to change the medical system so that it would turn to the patient. And along with the bureaucratic grin, it showed a nice, neat smile. "So that's how we're leaving," he heard a familiar voice behind him. "So we're saying goodbye, huh? Well, it's not like I'm a patient. I don't necessarily need to be treated humanely or humanized." Evan turned around. Victoria stood on the doorstep, the most talented nurse of the department, and also his favorite. She was an incredibly beautiful girl, with a chiseled figure and a charming face, but a sharp tongue. For the past 2 years, they only pretended not to meet and do not love each other. Rumors about their relationship circulated in the hospital, but Young and Happy denied them. "We're not saying goodbye," Evan smiled. "Am I moving to another planet? I'll be 100 kilometers away from you. Do you know how often we'll see each other? Once a month, at least." Victoria chuckled to make another barb, but suddenly cried. Cardiologist inwardly was ready for any claims, jealousy, shouting, but not for tears. This female weapon instantly forced him to declare surrender. And now he, initially ready to clarify relations, suddenly softened instantly. And he began to think how to calm the favorite, and at the same time to explain to her that the final separation is not in his plans. "Victoria, come on," he said. "I wanted to leave without saying goodbye." "You're a fool, Evan," replied the girl. "You're a PhD in English, but you're a fool. To leave in English, you have to be an Englishman, and you, my cosmopolitan, can leave only foolishly." Vuka had recently turned 25, and all the nurses she had started working with after college had either gone off to study to be doctors or had jumped out and gotten married and gone on maternity leave. But who were they getting? Drivers, laborers, managers at most. Victoria wanted a prince. The only one available was Evan, who was more like a king in exile, an eternal wanderer, prevented from ascending to the throne by his enemies. "Victoria, come on," the cardiologist said again. "You and I are not saying goodbye. I believe in long-distance relationships." "Really?" asked the girl, "and I do not believe. Do you know how many proposals I've had? Marriage?" Evan was surprised. "I thought we were dating." "You're a fool, Evan," shouted the nurse. "Job offers. I've had all kinds of job offers. Head nurse, private clinic. You're the only reason I've stuck around. I'm waiting for you to make me happy." Evan had to admit that she was right. It was high time for him to settle down, to have a family and children. They managed to hide their relationship even from their friend Grishka. That, by the way, is not very upset about the departure of a comrade. After all, not somewhere there is going, and on the promotion. "I'm sorry, Victoria," Evan exhaled. "I guess I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready yet, that's all." "For what?" "Well, for my family," the cardiologist replied. "If my kid gets sick, and you know what I'm like, I'll call a concilium. We'll discuss all the stuff snot or, God forbid, upset stomach." "Silly, silly Evan," Victoria said, but in a calm voice. She took her man's hand. "We just have to try to do things the way people do." "How?" Evan asked. "I asked you to keep our relationship private so you wouldn't get strangled here. Do you know how hard it is for a husband and wife to be in the same team?" "I could handle that," Victoria replied defiantly. "Or haven't you seen how strong I am? I mean something else. You could have introduced me to your parents, rented an apartment together. You know, in the dormitory, there are no romantic meetings. Are you really that desperate for money for me?" Evan felt embarrassed. Even though he held a respectable position, he still lived in the dormitory as a lab technician. Except that they gave him a separate room. but the doctor did nothing to make it cozy. He didn't even hang a curtain on the window. Victoria lived a floor above, and she had to master the wonders of spy science so that no one would see their meeting, and he didn't provide her with any romance. If he gave her flowers, it was once a year, not more often. He never took her to the sea. True, always helped financially, but money is just a piece of paper, not feelings. It became a discovery for him that his Vicky, whom he shamelessly used for the last 2 years, also has a soul, and he seemed to have spit in that soul. Introduce her to his parents, Evan sighed, trying to change the subject and push the unpleasant feelings away. Alas, that's impossible. My parents, you know. And the cardiologist made a vague gesture, which could be interpreted in 2 ways if desired. Either absent in principle, or flew to another planet. Evan was ready to support any version, as long as he didn't tell the truth. But you have parents, Victoria shouted impatiently. I saw the lens. And they live in the same city where you go to work. You expect me to believe in such coincidences? Did you look at my documents? The cardiologist asked. Of course, replied the nurse. I need to know if you're divorced, if you pay alimony. Oh, come on. You understand. My parents are. How can I put it delicately? Well, you're not gonna like it. You got a woman in there. Victoria hissed angrily. Maybe your true love is out there waiting for you. And I'm just a substitute brigade for an urgent need. No, what are you? Said the doctor. Victoria, I realize how I look from the outside. And I realize I'm being a pig too. But you and I are adults. Can't we just? Evan, stop it. The nurse interrupted him, impatient. I believe you, but let's make a deal. If you're leaving for good. And don't call me, and don't write, and don't ask for anything. I'll never give you anything else, not one cell of my body. And I swear I'll marry the first tractor driver or combine harvester I see, whoever calls. Evan sighed. Victoria was really good for him. She not only knew her worth, she had it. And he treated her wrong, looked down on her. He used her love like he was taking raisins out of a bun. Everything tasty in his mouth and the rest on the floor. That's not right. But why didn't you think of that before? Victoria, he asked. Give me a week. How about this? 1 week from now, and everything will come to a head. Either I propose to you, or we go our separate ways. Okay. The girl was silent, wondering what to say. There was a whole range of feelings on her face. She must have been trying to understand why she was wasting her time with this good but indecisive man. So, while the operation is going on and seconds count, he can make the right decision quickly. But if the question is about his personal life, he needs weeks, months, years. The answer to the indecisive suitor was forming in her mouth. You know what, Evan? The flight into the fountain was unpleasant, but it was sobering. The cold fall air was invigorating. Oliver thought that he'd really behaved inappropriately. But that thought existed in his head, without any remorse or desire to make amends. It was already done, so why worry about it? Thank you, he said to Peter, who approached the bum. Indeed, my closet should have been washed a long time ago. If you come near my girlfriend again, you hear me? Threatened the guy. I'll have you. Come on, Peter, come on. Leslie ran up to him. Oliver, I'm so embarrassed. It's okay, I deserve it. The artist smiled. He again wanted to make an offer to work for him as a model, but changed his mind, looking at the young competitor. Very, very glad to meet you. Young people, come to our city again. A murmur reigned in the cafe. The second waiter put a tray with 2 bottles of wine and rushed somewhere inside into the barrels. He was probably going to call Thomas to have Oliver detained and brought to the station, but such a prospect was not in the plans of the free artist. He thought that any situation, even the most unenviable, could be capitalized on. Besides, Oliver had a more pressing problem, He needed to dry his clothes before night fell. Of course, it wasn't as cold as December or January, but catching pneumonia was a real possibility. Fortunately, he already had a plan of action for such an eventuality. Getting out of the fountain, he slowly strolled away, and while the attention of all the visitors was drawn to the young hero who had sent him into the swim, Oliver nimbly stole 2 bottles of fortified wine left by the waiter and hid them in his coat. He walked out of the cafe with a victorious gait, waving goodbye to the woman at the table. Oliver moved a safe distance away, fearing not so much exposure as freezing. A plan to escape a cold death had already matured in his mind. Across the street from the cafe was a park that had recently been landscaped. They had put benches, gazebos, playgrounds for children, and most importantly, braziers where you could build a fire and use it to dry things. Oliver was lucky. Someone had recently roasted meat and left warm coals. The artist threw some brushwood he had gathered nearby and began to fan the flames. There was something philosophical in it, something eternal. It is true what they say, you can look at the fire endlessly. When the branches were burning, he put a couple of logs to them, as if they had been left there for him. When he was warm enough, Oliver found a large bough, pressed it into the ground, and hung up his coat to dry. He put his boots and socks on the edge of the brazier, away from the flames. He buried his feet in the sand mixed with ashes and sat down on a log. So he spent 2 hours warming himself by the flame and sipping wine from a bottle. The blissful warmth spread both outside and inside his body. Soon all problems began to recede to the periphery of his consciousness. Also, a great idea popped into his head. Who said he couldn't go to the hospital? When it gets dark, he'll climb in through the window. He'll pick any room, lie down in an empty bed and tell the patients. Do they have every single person in there accounted for? When it was finally dark and Oliver was dead drunk, he began his difficult journey to the medical center. It was not only the darkness, which was at least diluted by the streetlights, but also the native soil. It was trying to jump up and hit him in the face. He had to put his hands out so as not to scratch his nose. Finally, the hospital buildings appeared. The free artist, although he did not consider himself an old man, was no longer suitable for acrobatic feats. Conquering the fence seemed to him like climbing a mountain peak. He urgently needed an open window to get inside. Even the second floor was an insurmountable obstacle, but he was lucky. Someone had left a window open in the hospital annex, right near the main entrance, just where the guard and some other character had taken him today. It was at this point that the elevation went down, so it was possible to get to the open window without too much labor. The free artist was jubilant once inside. In the pitch darkness, he felt how drunk he was. There was a sepulchral silence in the ward. The patients were barely breathing, and Oliver sneaked around so as not to wake them. In the darkness, he felt the bed and groped for it. It was small, narrow, and the bureaucrats were saving money on everything. There was no blanket, and the pillow was small and ridiculous. This one was definitely unoccupied. Oliver crawled onto the crib, covered himself with a sheet, and fell into a dead sleep. It was comfortable, soft, warm, and peaceful. For some reason, the bed had soft sides, but the intoxicated mind of the free artist did not pay any attention to it. The arrival of the artist did not wake anyone, although he was making a lot of noise. I wonder why. Helga couldn't help herself from the happy news. Her son was returning to the city. Not just anyone, but the head doctor of the local hospital. She couldn't believe her happiness, that such a negligent father could have such a wonderful offspring. Ivan didn't spoil her with visits, but he didn't disappoint her with calls. Yesterday, he called and said, as if nothing had happened, "I'm coming home as a chief physician," that he would write a dissertation, and in general is going to reach for the stars. Helga was over the moon. She would have to bring home her old fool, and then life's journey could be considered a success. Of course, she could quite easily spend the rest of her days alone, but she felt it was her son, not her, who needed the reunion now. I could see why Evan had a grudge against her, that she could not keep Oliver, did not want to put up with his lifestyle and harsh words. And even though the artist had left her 10 years ago, she still worried about him. Worried. After all, 2 children on their feet. Where can I find him, that bastard? Vans, do you copy? Helga called a man who's got Oliver on his cell phone. I hear you, he answered. His voice was deliberately gruff, but Vance was a good man. A good man. Did you recognize him? The woman asked. Of course I recognized him, said the man. What? Are you calling to wish me happy birthday, friend? It was already in August, but better late than never. Oh, sorry, Vance, said Helga. That's not why I'm calling. Listen, I'm looking for my Oliver. Have you seen him? Of course I have. Vance's voice suddenly became rougher. He came by my place the other day, you bum. He told me he loved me, but his words, old girl, are not worth the air they're thrown into. I take it you didn't accept him. You didn't believe his words. No, the person I'm talking to answered. Listen, I work hard. My eyes can't see anything anymore. I can barely hold this brush. And him. Sleeping in ditches, drinking bitter in buckets like a cucumber. He walked 5 kilometers to me without even panting. Does he look good? Helga asked. She knew the answer to that question. With Oliver's health, even street life couldn't do him much harm. Excellent. Vance confirmed her guess. Listen, I got a call from a fellow from Morculus. He was relaxing there on the terrace. He saw such a thing. Helga thought for a moment, what are we talking about? And then she remembered the very place where she had tried her first cocktails when she was very young. Is this place still in demand among the public? Oh, it's a cafe? The woman was surprised. Wow, are they still in business? Of course, replied Vance. And you do not go out of the house at all? Oh, I go out, Vance. I go out. So what happened there in this cafe that... Oh, that's right. This dummy of ours found some kids, kissed them off, and one of them almost drowned him in the fountain. He held him underwater for 3 minutes. Can you believe it? Everything bubbled up. They wanted to call the police, but he got away unharmed. Helga waved her hand. Vance always liked to embellish. Tell you what, Vance, if you see mine, tell him I was looking for him. I don't feel well. I'm going to die. Just say so. What, old woman, is it true? Asked the interlocutor. You do not dare be that, do you understand? I'll think about it. Helga replied and hung up. Every change for the worse, Christopher thought, sitting in his cozy office. The leather armchair perfectly fit his generally slender figure. In the corner stood an expensive electric kettle with a built-in filter, coffee maker, humidifier, and other gifts from grateful contractors. If he suddenly wanted to rest, you can lie on the leather sofa, another surprise he received after the renovation of the entryway. But there's no time to rest for Christopher. On the door is a proud, gold-embossed plaque. Deputy Chief Physician for Housekeeping. It's a work of art. The printing is even, and there's not a blemish or dot on the surface. The most beautiful plaque in the country. Christopher was sure that even the Minister of Health himself had a worse seal. He made himself, and at the same time renovated the hospital, the buildings, and the surrounding area. Alas, the available space for repair and improvement in the hospital was running out. The money was running out, and Christopher still had to renew his car and send his son to language courses abroad. He'd have to make do. When he was appointed Deputy Chief Physician, the detractors laughed. Christopher doesn't even have a medical degree. You're not a doctor. Said one of his enemies, you're the storekeeper. Who gave you the right to be called Deputy Chief Physician? Christopher reacted coldly to such attacks, answering with restraint. With his detractors, he gradually sorted out, because the head cooks always have long and clean hands. Indeed, Is it a joke that a man who is not directly related to medicine became deputy chief physician? Christopher would answer this question in blocks. First, you have to convince everyone of your indispensability. Secondly, at all levels to create confidence that without the position of deputy chief physician in the hospital, cannot do without. Thirdly, to hold on to the position tenaciously from the last strength. And then all personnel storms will pass by. The previous chief physician took little interest in the affairs of the hospital, preferring to sit in his own office. For the last year, he had not been involved in any matters at all, leaving everything to his deputies. But Christopher was always in the thick of things, making the most of them. Like today, for instance, he saw that homeless man and brilliantly impersonated a doctor to get rid of him. He acted in such a way that not a single coin in the whole hospital and in the neighborhood could not fall silently for the deputy chief physician on the economic part. His special pride was the ritual store. Christopher rented out the premises on which it had grown up for an incredible profit. Not for the hospital, of course, but for himself. The paperwork said it was supposed to be something else. What it was, he couldn't remember. Every day, inconsolable relatives came to the funeral store to say goodbye. The trade in wreaths, lamps, ribbons, and crosses flourished. Of course, the view of the memorial paraphernalia from the main entrance to the hospital was not always to the liking of patients and visitors, especially when a hearse was parked in the parking lot. But to the disgruntled, Christopher always responded philosophically. "Memento mori," said the deputy chief physician. "Remember death. We all came out of the ashes, and it's only a matter of time before we return to the ashes." Speaking of ashes, he managed to get the hospital to buy the most expensive urns in the country. Unfortunately, there was a flaw. The waste garbage cans were too sturdy and had not been written off for 4 years. It was impossible to break them. He used to renew them every year or even more often. Christopher didn't rule out the possibility that he might have to sabotage the incredibly sturdy garbage cans and buy new ones. Everything was going fine before, but now there was a new challenge. A young, very green head doctor of only 35 years old is sent to the hospital, and what Christopher had heard about him did not inspire optimism. A fanatical, totally dedicated doctor. Most likely, he would not tolerate any kind of machinations and violations. On the contrary, he would stick his long nose into Christopher's finances, or, God forbid, force him to share. The day before, on Thursday, the deputy chief physician came to one of the medical buildings, where repair work was in full swing. According to the documents, they should have been finished 2 months ago. But the builders, who were hired by a clever contractor, were working very slowly. And after all, the certificates of completed work were signed long ago. The money was transferred. The previous head doctor did not get into such issues, but it is unlikely that his successor will be as malleable. "Move it, you bastards!" Christopher shouted, watching the workers. "Move, or I'll leave you penniless." But the foreman's words had no effect whatsoever. Finishers lazily wandered around the room and worked at a snail's pace. It was the kind of hopelessness and doom that slaves in ancient Rome must have worked with. Alas, Christopher was not a patrician, and therefore could not influence the slave laborers with the methods he had in mind. The chamberlain tried to calm down and pull himself together. In principle, if you work day and night, tirelessly, then by Monday it is quite realistic to finish. On Friday, the new head physician, most likely, will not delve so deeply into the affairs of the hospital. Besides, he had prepared a great program for him. Restaurant, billiards, sauna. "Come on, come on," Christopher shouted, dialing the contractor. The phone was unavailable. "Why are you shouting, father?" The builder, who smelled of wine, asked him. "There's no need to yell at us. We are experienced people." A smart man said, "If you do badly and quickly, the speed will be forgotten, but the quality will be remembered." And good deeds, as usual, are not done quickly. Can you do a good job? Christopher challenged. You just do it for me, no matter how. It's better to take your time with bad things, too, Father, or what happens? If you do bad things, that'll be accepted late. That's what I'm telling you. No, I couldn't argue with those bastards. That's what. Very glad to meet you, the man said. My name is Christopher, and I'm your first deputy. Let's talk like this, simply. Evan Christopher, no barriers, no limits. Just keep it simple, keep it right. What do you say? Something about this man seemed familiar to Evan. The voice, I think, and the sweater. Where had he seen him before? Maybe at a reception. Right, this is the same guy from the video he saw this morning. Not a lot of views, of course, but still. The chief medical director pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. The link was saved. Hello, Christopher, Evan said. I'm the new chief physician. I wonder where I've seen you before. And then I answered on the internet. Look, aren't you in this video? He turned on his phone and showed it to his deputy. But he wasn't embarrassed for a second. Putting the same trademark smile on his face, he said without hesitation, You see how well we're doing. We cured him. Cured who? The head doctor was surprised. You know who, the patient. Here, did not go a little bit to the emergency room, so we moved. Do not pay attention, do not worry. Do you know what happened to him? Evan asked. Of course, Christopher replied. He's fine. We carried him a little bit. He got up and walked away. What's this man's name? So I can verify the information. Noma's Oliver. The deputy started tapping his fingers thoughtfully. Nemtsov. Walker. Evan, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Oliver woke up with a terrible headache. It was like his life energy had been drained out of him and his body was filled with lead. He couldn't move. And most importantly, he couldn't understand where he was or how he had gotten here. The free artist was lying on his side in a semi-dark room. Everything in front of his eyes was red, as if a tasteless curtain had been thrown in front of him. Only his left arm moved faintly, the rest of his body stiff from the forced pose. Yesterday came back in fragments that appeared before his mind's eye, as if in a kaleidoscope. Here he was being kicked out by Vance. Here he asks to be put in the hospital. Then, as in the good old days, he drinks at Morbilus's and bathes in the fountain. And he seems to be going to the public garden. How did he end up here? When he heard voices, Oliver hurried to cover himself with a sheet. He rolled over onto his back, closed his eyes, and held his breath. You can't do that. The first voice spoke loudly. You can't do that. Look, if it's about this bum, and God with him, who cares about him? Me, I'm interested, answered the first one. You are ex officio deputy chief physician. Yes, ex officio, said the second voice. But in fact, I have a technical degree. Technical. And I'm telling you, you can't do that. The man shouted in a rage. You can't sell funeral paraphernalia outside the main building of the hospital. For God's sake. A second voice contradicted him. That's a lot of money. We should have opened a canteen here, objected the first voice. A pharmacy, anything. But not a ritual store. By the way, where did you get the keys? Christopher blurted out. First, the new head doctor showed him a creepy video of him and a guard dragging Oliver. And then he gave him a hard time about the funeral parlor, and the workday hadn't even officially started yet. But then Christopher went crazy and opened the door to the store with his own key. What are we gonna do? We have to find a way out of this. Why shouldn't I have a key? I asked him in a subservient manner. I'm the storekeeper. I go around checking things out. What if there's something wrong? What if you get caught short? Evan countered. The hospital would have to pay for it. You're the hired help. The previous day came back to Oliver's mind. The keywords: hospital, doctor, ritual hall. How he, sneaking around in the dark, had decided to get into the room. Where he wondered, had he gotten to? Evan, let's not get facetious, Christopher said. Yes, the funeral parlor is not a pleasant sight for some of the more impressionable people. But look at the order inside. What cleanliness! The head doctor had a different opinion. He could smell a subtle but unpleasant odor, which is something people might give off if they're awake. Really? See how neat it is here. Christopher kept pushing. Wreaths to one side, ribbons in another, crosses in a third, coffins. Yeah, let's talk about coffins, Evan agreed. Does this coffin personally? Doesn't raise any questions. Lying under the sheet, Oliver began to shiver. The voices grew louder and the footsteps closer. He thought about taking off his veil, jumping up and running away, but his stiff body would hardly approve of such a dynamic. Can you see? Evan asked. Oh, for crying out loud, there's a dead body in here. It's in the coffin, not in the refrigerator. Christopher's eyes widened. Indeed, in one of the coffins, under the sheet, the outline of a man was clearly visible. The only nuance was that the arms lay unnaturally on his chest, as if they had been placed carelessly. Overcome with fear, Christopher lowered the sheet. His eyes darkened. In the coffin lay the homeless man they had carried around the corner of the hospital yesterday. Good God, the deputy whispered, crossing himself. God forgive me, God forgive me, God forgive me. Father! Evan shouted, running up to the coffin. Father! Christopher sobbed. He felt sorry for everyone. The poor bum whose heart attack yesterday he'd mistaken for a talent act. The new head doctor, who was starting work with such a tragic incident, but most of all himself, because it is he, Christopher, who will be held responsible for what happened, and it looks like it's going to be more than just a dismissal. Investigators from the capital will come here. They will dig, and they will find every penny that leaked past the state treasury. Ahem. Suddenly the corpse coughed and opened his eyes. Oh, Evan, it's been years. Did you forget about your file? In the ensuing silence, a noise was heard as the Deputy Chief Physician for Economic Affairs collapsed to the floor. Evan slapped Christopher's cheeks, trying to bring him to his senses. The Deputy Chief opened his eyes. It's a good thing there's carpeting everywhere, he whispered. I'd have gotten hurt. The homeless guy was waddling around, warming up. How could he be Evan's father? Well, life happens, Christopher thought. Sometimes the most disgusting parents have great kids, but more often than not, it's the other way around. Are you awake? The doctor in charge asked. I want a written explanation. Today. With these words, Evan headed for the exit. He had a hard job ahead of him. If he was met with such a mess at the entrance to the hospital, what would happen next? He had not yet touched the medication, the quality of the treatment, and other aspects that made up the success of the treatment. Evan walked with a steady stride, followed by Christopher, who had come to his senses. Oliver, exhausted from last night's drunkenness, was trailing behind him. He was thirsty, and he was leaning against the faucet of the cooler in the ritual store, behind his son. The Deputy Chief Physician was in such a hurry that he'd forgotten to lock the door. Evan, shouted Christopher as they passed through the lobby of the main building. I can explain everything, I swear. I don't doubt it for a second, the head doctor replied. Both explain and answer. People began to stare at them. Evan felt awkward, realizing that his new staff was getting to know him here and now in a less than ideal environment. But he was not going to change his mind. Dear colleagues, he addressed those who were looking at him and Christopher. I'm sorry we're meeting in such a difficult environment, but we don't have time to dawdle. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get to work. The little speech seemed to make a good impression on the staff. Evan caught a few appreciative glances and smiles and nodded to each one, then froze in indecision, wondering what to do next. Heaven, for a word, a familiar voice sounded behind the newly minted head doctor's back. Victoria, said Evan, turning around. You're the last thing I needed. Evan, I'm not waiting, the girl replied. You'll give me a few minutes right now, or I'll leave you forever. Christopher rubbed his hands together. This was his salvation. Now, according to the situation, he would either organize a private meeting between them or... No, the chief was definitely not going to kick her out. Zaphos decided to take full control of the situation. Yes, don't kick the girl out. He said, come on, I'll show you your new office. You can talk to me. Here, look. This is Frank, our senior security guard. Frank, stay awake. He ran briskly up to the second floor of the main building, taking wide strides. He occasionally looked over his shoulder and made a hand gesture that said, catch up, catch up, catch up. Evan sighed and followed, taking Victoria under his elbow. Victoria, it's nothing personal, the chief said. It's all Vonda shit here. That's fine, the nurse smiled. It's about time we got things in order, and I know how. As he passed the guard, Evan beckoned to him. Frank, a word. Oliver couldn't believe his eyes and ears for a long time. This was how his son had grown, not only in height, but also professionally. He's an entire head doctor. Now, probably, it will be possible to go to the hospital as a free hotel and canteen. Now, no one will dare to kick him out on the street and talk to him disrespectfully. And the guard, he can even pull his ears, and nothing will happen to him for this. True, when the free artist was distracted, just for a second. This nimble little man took his son away under his arm with some girl. No problem. We just need to find his office. He is the head doctor. Let the registrar try to stop him. She's the worst for it. Good jobs are hard to find in the city these days. I've done a lot for him, Oliver reasoned aloud. First of all, I brought him into the world. Secondly, I gave him a wonderful dog when he was 3. My wife didn't want him to have one, but who asked her? When my son was 6, I painted a portrait. What else did I do for him? I gave him a name, patronymic, and surname, of course. It wasn't much, but in Oliver's mind, he considered any indulgence to any man to be the highest gratitude on his part. So he was convinced that Evan would not refuse him help. Especially since it was winter and there was nowhere to go. He could go to breakfast in the morning and then to the city, to his favorite pubs and friends, and let them try to keep him out. Freeze. Oliver was brought out of his thoughts by a guard. He literally blocked the road, and the homeless man collided with him with all his might. That's when the power of his opponent was revealed. The guard didn't even stagger, but the artist collapsed to the ground. Hey, big guy, Oliver snapped at him. Get out of the way. This is a secure facility, the guard smiled. You can't come in and out of here as you please. Yes, you can, replied the artist. If your son is the head doctor. Who's that, Evan? The guard asked incredulously. That's your idea. That's a cross, Oliver said with heat. My dear son, it's been 10 years. Evan was under strict orders not to let you in, the guard explained. But I wouldn't have let you in anyway. Get out of here, or I'll call Thomas. To tell you the truth, I should have done that yesterday. No, the guard is definitely lying. There's no way his son, his own flesh and blood, would order his own father off the premises. The officer was definitely cheating. But how do we outsmart this lump? We must get inside by all means and talk to my son face to face. Okay, Oliver smiled. I'll do it. Can I use the restroom? To the bathroom? The guard asked and scratched his head. There were no orders from the chief physician, and to refuse such a request to a beggar is not Christian. Come on, I'll walk you out. As they passed the staircase, Oliver, with an unprecedented impetuosity for his age, suddenly darted away and ran upstairs. The guard shouted after him, but he couldn't move at the same speed. He could not move at the same speed. Here's your office, Chief, Christopher said. Simple but tasteful. In need of repair, of course. The office really didn't make the best impression. A shabby desk, a chair with a broken lift mechanism, a sofa on 3 legs. The walls were peeling and the doorknob was wobbly. Nothing in the world is random though. Christopher had deliberately chosen this particular office so that the new head of the department would ask him to tidy it up. The deputy would demonstrate his own indispensability and efficiency. Good, Evan said. He was unimpressed by this environment. Leave us alone. What about? Christopher began to wail. He was waiting for instructions to clean up the office. All right, go, Evan demanded. We'll deal with you later. The deputy walked out the door, puzzled. Say how messy it is, Evan said. What I have to work with here? You won't believe what happened. Evan, I've been thinking, Victoria said with a touch of solemnity. Marry me. With these words, she got down on one knee, took a box out of her pocket and opened it. Inside were a pair of charming cufflinks. Victoria, get up immediately. The head doctor demanded. What kind of joke is this? What kind of jokes? The girl questioned. You don't ask me to marry you. So I decided to ask you myself. Well, say yes or no. The door swung open. Oliver stood on the threshold, and a few seconds later the guard ran up. Son, shouted the artist. Son, that's how you are with your father, isn't it? Evan, I'm sorry. The guard shouted over him. That old rascal has escaped. I've overtaken. The head doctor was silent. Then he looked at Victoria, who continued to kneel, and said, You wanted to meet my father. Evan pointed at the dirty bum. Meet Oliver Walker. After, the girl said impatiently. I was asking you a question. I agree, Victoria. I'm in. Only on one condition. You'll work here with me. Okay.
From his name Mike, buddies once cut out the ridiculous in the US Michael, so it went. Michael was his name in high school, then in the zone, where he was driven right after his 18th birthday. And now, years later, when he became a truck driver, no one called him anything else, not even his brother John. If there was a decent gap between trips, Michael settled down with his brother. He, more than anyone, understood why his brother decided to take up farming, and it was too hard for both of them to live with people, to adjust, to tolerate, to adapt. John had chosen his own kind of quiet, a house in the middle of nowhere, only the voices of animals. He kept pedigree goats, and they were quite noisy creatures. But his workers were a selection of silent, middle-aged men, honest, undrinking, and hardworking. Others didn't stick around. And since John paid his men very well, if these workers were fired tomorrow, others would line up, expecting to get a place. Michael had his own special way of shutting people out. There was no greater loneliness than being alone in a crowd. He had learned that when he was still in the zone, and solitude was a dream. But one could immerse oneself in one's own thoughts, and no one had access there. And now, the road was flowing under the wheels of his truck, and music was playing in his headphones, helping him to shut himself off from the world. Michael didn't like this stretch of road. Though the mountains were low, the highway descended from them in a winding ribbon, a real serpentine. He had to drive slowly. Another car could appear from the corner at a moment's notice, and the road surface, damn it. From time to time there were potholes. Just keep your eyes open. And now it's foggy. It would have been better not to go on a trip today, not to risk the cargo, to wait a day. But Michael risked it. The fact that he drove so slowly allowed him to avoid trouble. He not only noticed the fragile body lying on the road, but also braked in time. Michael had never hit a single person in his entire career. He's never even killed a dog. Chauffeurs have an omen. If a dog is under the wheels, the next one will be a man. But on Michael's conscience were only birds, which occasionally crashed into the windshield. The man jumped to the ground and hurried to the lying. A child, a teenager, but bending over the body, he realized that it was a girl, very young, maybe a high school student. She lay as if she were dead tired and had fallen asleep, snuggled against the ground. Her blonde hair, cut in a bob, partially covered her face, pale, without makeup. Windbreaker jacket, jeans, sneakers, the girl was dressed without pretension. Small hand, thin fingers, on one of them, a penny bead ring. Michael expected to see a pool of blood. But there was no blood, none at all, unless you counted the abrasion on the girl's cheek. And the man made up his mind, carefully took the girl's wrist, and as the school nurse had taught him long ago, he tried to feel the pulse with 3 fingers at once. The stranger was alive, her pulse, though weak, was beating under his hand. Michael called for an ambulance. He knew that the car would come quickly. There was a special program. For such accidents, the crews come first. But still, it was impossible to leave the girl here. At any moment, cars could appear on the road. Michael still risked a little time. He brought a plate from his truck, spread it on the side of the road, and then gently picked up the girl and carried her there. The man didn't know if he could touch her. She might scream in pain if she moved. But she was silent. That was bad. Apparently, the shock was so deep that the pain couldn't get through. Who the hell hit a girl and drove off? I understand. Everyone cares about his own skin, but to leave a senseless body in the middle of the road. Michael squatted beside the girl, smoking and waiting. The paramedics did arrive quickly. 2 trim middle-aged women came out with gloves on and leaned over the victim. In the old days, paramedics didn't wear gloves. Now everyone's afraid of AIDS and other contagions. Did you hit her? A paramedic gave Michael a sidelong glance. No, my God, I found her. She's pretty bad, huh? Well, what can I say? The woman's voice was tired. Basic vitals only. Low blood pressure, weak pulse. Let's take her to traumatology. Are you guys gonna stay here and wait for the police? I'm coming with you, Michael decided. It was against all the rules. If it was he who hit the girl and then got into his car, he could so easily a few hundred meters away from the ambulance, leave, and let them look for him. Moreover, he had such a past. The police would be sure to pick on him. But he really decided to go, to make sure that the girl was more or less all right. Michael carried her to the car himself. He knew the last thing an ambulance driver wanted to do was carry a stretcher. Although he often had to do that, at the trauma center, Michael waited a long time. Then the police arrived at the same time, and the doctor who had admitted the girl came out. Fortunately, she had her papers on her, he said, and then through to the guards. This man had nothing to do with it. The girl is dehydrated, has a severe nervous breakdown, and that's it. She was given a sedative. She will come to her senses. She will tell everything herself. Now she is asleep. The doctor handed the girl's passport to one of the police officers, and he made Michael a sign to wait. I must write down your statement anyway, he said, and opened the passport. Do you know Nellie? Who? Michael suddenly lost his tongue. What did you say her name was? He turned pale and involuntarily grabbed the windowsill. His legs wouldn't hold him. The brothers, Michael and John, had once grown up in a nice, close-knit family. Their father was in business, and their mother, a nurse by profession, after giving birth to 2 boys one after the other, sat at home with them. The father's business was becoming more and more successful. Harvey was a responsible, honest man, a master of golden hands. His word could always be relied on. And gradually, the number of customers multiplied, the business expanded. The family moved into a large new house. The mother enjoyed the fact that it is so spacious, bright, beautiful. A lot of time devoted to the garden. Around the house she created a real paradise. The growing sons made plans. The eldest, John, from childhood loved animals and wanted to work in the future at the stud farm, breed thoroughbred horses. Mike was truly in love with traveling. For him, there was no better leisure than a tour. Together with friends, he went live foot the whole region and hoped that his future specialty will be associated with trips to somewhere in the protected points of the earth. He was beckoned by professions, the very names of which sounded stiff-tick. oceanologist, volcanologist, but none of this was destined to come true. His father was framed by a partner whom he trusted as himself. It happened when they were planning a big project together. In a short time, Harvey was not only broke, he had a huge, by the standards of the family, debts. Had to sell everything, and a new house, and 2 cars, and a little jewelry mother, good furniture, expensive phones. Harvey sought to pay off those to whom he remained owed, to the maximum. And when there was nothing left to give, the man disappeared. For several days he was in a severe depression. His wife felt that the case is bad. A psychiatrist was invited to the house, but he recommended that the patient be placed in hospital as soon as possible. Harvey categorically refused to lie down in the asylum. Sometime took the prescribed medication, and then just disappeared. In the morning his wife did not find him in bed. No one heard the man leave the house. None of the neighbors saw him either. Much later, his folded clothes and shoes were found on the riverbank. The investigator assumed that Harvey thus decided to hide from debts because the body was never found. But relatives had no doubt he had passed away. Too heavy a burden had been weighing on him lately. The guilt was eating away at him. Now the family lived in the cheapest apartment they could find. 1 room for everyone. John was already studying at the Agricultural Academy at the time, living in the dormitory, coming for vacations. He wanted to drop out and go to work, but his mother insisted that the eldest son should graduate and get a diploma. "We'll manage somehow," she persuaded. "You have a little time left. I'll get a job. Nurses are always needed. And then Mike will finish school, get back on his feet." Mom did find a place. She was hired at a hospice. Of course, this institution had nothing in common with the best hospices for the seriously ill. The dilapidated building of the nursing home had been renovated, and they gathered there hopelessly ill old people who were no longer needed by their loved ones. The mother was shocked when on the first day she saw an old woman covered head to toe in a semi-dark room. Was she dead? Alive for now, but still about to die. Let her rest in peace. Meanwhile, the staff were quietly drinking tea. Of course, Mom couldn't treat her charges like that. Like her husband, she worked not for fear, but for conscience, did everything to ease the condition of patients, to make their lives easier. And her co-workers didn't like her. No, my mother was not going to leave, because she understood that without her the old people would be even harder. But her illness had taken its toll. The terrible stresses she had to endure lately had an impact. If the family had the former opportunities, most likely, my mother would have been able to put on her feet. But now she died quietly. By the time of her funeral, Michael had already graduated from high school. He was 18 years old, and out of grief, he went to see the man he thought was responsible for everything. Because of his father's partner, this Austin actually ceased to exist in their family. If not for the meanness of this man, and the father would be alive, and most likely the mother. The meeting ended tragically for the guy. He waited for Austin on the street and attacked him, although the businessman had a security guard with him. Michael was twisted, taken away, and later Austin ensured that the young man received a sentence. Michael was also accused of drug distribution. The businessman realized that he couldn't let a guy with his explosive temper go free. Sooner or later he would attack again, and God knows how it would end. Let him sit behind the barbed wire to cool down. No one supported the brothers at this time. Former acquaintances believed in the younger one's guilt. The older one was avoided like the plague. John was abandoned by the girl with whom he began to meet. Her relatives categorically forbade her to connect her life with a family of drug addicts. That's when John lost faith in people. He sold a small city apartment, bought a house in the village, and took up his farm. He worked without sparing himself. He had everything he needed: the necessary knowledge, diligence, practical wit. And in time he became a farmer who stood quite firmly on his feet. He did not try to buy breeding horses. He could not afford them. He raised thoroughbred goats, processed milk, kept poultry. When the younger brother was free, the older one called him to come to him. "Thank you," Michael said sincerely. "Maybe later. I want to try it myself first." Austin had hoped in vain. Michael never quite got over him. Out of the corner of his eye, he continued to follow the businessman's life. He knew that he had been married for many years, but the couple had never had children. Then Austin found himself a girlfriend somewhere on the side, and when he had a daughter, immediately took her away from her mother. It seems that no one asked the young mother's consent to this. Austin believed that money solves all issues. He paid whoever he had to pay and got the child, but his wife had never been able to get attached to the girl. Her very existence was an eternal reminder of her husband's infidelity. Therefore, when Nellie grew up, she was determined first in one school, boarding school, then in another. Had to transfer Nellie from one institution to another. The character of the girl were complex. Michael did not know whether ever again cross the roads of himself and the businessman who broke his family's life. But he really hoped so. Can't they just stay home until September? Angelica sat over the list of boarders who had to be taken on vacation and grumbled, knowing that it would do nothing. It would only allow her to get a bit of a release. The boarding house was female, or rather, maiden, elite and closed. At the end of spring, exams were held here, as always. Under other circumstances, most of the girls would have gone to their families for the summer, but not everyone is ready to take their own children, even for a few months. Businessmen and their wives are busy people. For the girls who had to stay at the boarding house for the summer, they organized a trip of some kind. The geographical scope was very wide. Parents willingly splurged, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and the daughters are happy, and themselves, freedom. But this summer, the second summer in quarantine, has confused all the plans. It was impossible to travel, at least to places attractive and crowded at the same time. But the remaining girls, numbering a little more than 10, were not going to go home, nor were they willing to stay in the boarding house until the beginning of September. 2 tutors were left to look after the girls. Natalie, a gray-haired strict lady, and Angelica, a history teacher. Angelica Petrovna was 35 years old, a knowledgeable teacher, but the girls considered her the softest of the teaching staff, considered her her own, and did not always obey. Both women puzzled over what to do with the boarders in July and August, and could offer them nothing but the library, watching movies and tennis. "They'll drive us crazy," Natalie said uneducationally. But then a friend of hers, a woman who was professionally engaged in tourism, showed up and suggested an option. A nobleman's estate in the middle of nowhere. "Very interesting peninsula where it stands, very interesting," Julia said. "A very picturesque place. The lake, the high cliffs, how many birds nest there. A meteorite fell in these parts, and there is a memorial sign there. Again, the remains of an ancient settlement. Those who are fond of history, you can't drag them away by their ears. And the lake itself is indescribable beauty. What views! Are there no artists among your girls? Tell me about the estate itself." Natalie interrupted the flow of eloquence. Julia went into detail. It's a 19th century manor house. Not all of it has been restored, but one wing has already been converted into a kind of hotel. But people don't come there for a long time. It's boring for today's spoiled tourists. For now. Then, of course, they will organize a lot of entertainment there. But for now, well-to-do people stay there for a few days, to get married, to relax with fishing and photo hunting, and so on. Do you think our girls would be satisfied with that?" Natalie asked skeptically. "They are not primarily interested in the beauty of nature, but in entertainment. You can go boating." Julia began to enumerate. "On the other side of the village, there is an abandoned temple, very picturesque. I'll keep silent. There is a horse club, a store. It wouldn't be difficult to arrange excursions in the neighborhood. Well there, exotics of all sorts with a peasant bent. Raking hay, milking a goat." Natalie only sighed heavily, remembering Nancy Prokhorov's manicure. each nail like a painted dagger. It was the kind of thing you could only milk. Not to mention the fact that she's afraid of the Carolina wildlife, starting with mosquitoes and ants. It's much later they learn that there are vipers on the island, and sometimes bears wander there, that there are swamps around the only road leading to the mainland, that all amenities are limited to hot and cold water and electricity, that all amenities are limited to hot and cold water and electricity, that you can call your relatives with great difficulty and not always. Cell phones catch only on a tiny patch which they find by chance. A step to the left, a step to the right, and there is no connection. All this will be later. For now, Natalie sighed. Well, for a change, let's offer the girls this option. Angelica will give them a historical excursion. The girls became animated and expressed their desire to go to the peninsula. Maybe they, the satiated, are waiting there for some new impressions. In extreme case, it will be possible to wrinkle their noses and say, "Fie, where have they taken us?" And at the last minute, Angelique thought, they threw in a new border. We don't have enough to worry about. You're always wary when you take in another girl. How will the others take to her? How will she settle in on her own? And now, well, the right is not up to her. The girl was brought by a governess, but the documents were in order and the payment for the girl had been made, so there was no reason to refuse. The attendant did not ask the questions to which Angelica was accustomed. Accepting new wards, what are the living conditions? Can we see the bedrooms? What are they fed with? Who of the teachers to call if the girl complains that she is being abused? What's the situation here? It is clear that it is not the army. We are not talking about hazing. But girls can bully the new girl if they don't like her. No conditions, no asking for supervision. Angelica even felt that it was not a new boarder, but a girl who would be working here. Nellie looked away, not showing any feelings, neither regret nor joy that she had come to the boarding house. The other girls usually chirped, remembering 1,000 little things they'd forgotten to say, asking her to give this and that, not to forget about this, to call, to send pictures. Some of them wiped away tears. Nellie looked past the governess and looked frozen. Angelica was wary. There was no telling how the girl would behave. In any case, she must be encouraged. The teacher approached with a soft smile, put a palm on the new girl's shoulder. "Come on, I'll take you to the dormitory and introduce you to the girls." She waited for some clue to start a conversation. The new girl would ask something, share something. But Nellie was silent. The shoulder under Angelica's arm was so thin and bony that the teacher thought, we should tell the canteen to give her bigger portions. And for the afternoon snack, they should give not 1, but 2 buns. Angelica immediately realized that the new girl would not like Casey, a girl who looked older than her years because of her rough facial features and excessive weight. Casey passionately wanted to lose weight, wrote out in a notebook different diets, did morning exercises, but to really fight with herself, she was not able to. Food produced on Olia even some kind of narcotic effect. She was in a good mood, and even in euphoria, when she ate to the brim so that it was hard to breathe. A look in the mirror always spoiled Ola's mood. She always went to the shower alone, so her friends wouldn't see her shapeless body. Casey disliked all the girls who stayed thin without any effort, and the new girl would certainly be among them. I'll put her with Caroline and Veronica. Angelica decided, it's only for one night, we're leaving tomorrow. And during the vacation, the girl will probably make friends with someone else and move in with her new companions. Although all the boarders were from well-to-do families, they were not entitled to separate rooms. Both the little girls and the older grown-up girls lived in 3s and 4s. There was a free place in the corner room, where they were not exactly friends. They were too different, but the girls were calm and not scandalous. Veronica was the tallest of the boarders. Natural blonde, her hair almost white, curled at the shoulders. Her features were small, her nose was upturned, and her eyes were blue. If it weren't for the height of a basketball player, Veronica would have many admirers. And that's all she needed. That's all she was interested in. Boys, young men, men. Veronica really wanted them to like her. She never talked about what she wanted to become, what profession to get, but she dreamed of future marriage all the time. Her neighbor Caroline was a girl who was rarely ugly, although it would seem a wonderful combination, blue eyes and dark brown hair. But her facial features were wrong. Her eyes were too close set, and she had a large, long nose. Despite her unattractive appearance, Caroline was pleasant to talk to. Her family was considered one of the richest in the city, her parents owning several travel agencies. She had the best of everything: expensive clothes, cosmetics, and little things that other girls could only dream about. At the same time, she was very simple, not arrogant, and interesting to talk to. She had traveled to many countries and was an excellent storyteller. Angelica knew that in this room, with these girls, no one would poison Nellie. "Except the new neighbor," said Angelica, opening the door with a smile. "Nellie, this is Caroline, and this is Veronica. I think you will find a common language without problems." Nellie immediately realized which bed was meant for her. This one, by the door, tucked in. It was getting dark outside the window, and the girls were sitting on their beds with their feet up. Caroline was at the window, with her legs twisted Turkish style, and Veronica at the wall, wrapped in a downy shawl. They seemed to be talking about something, and this fascinating conversation was interrupted. They looked at the newcomer with curiosity, but it was quite friendly. "Well," Veronica asked, as soon as Angelica closed the door behind her, "where did you come from? Why at the end of the year and not at the beginning?" You should know where from, Nellie thought, remembering her father's house, which always reminded her of a prison. The name of the town she had dropped in passing. So far away. Veronica was surprised. Don't they have their own schools there? "You want to learn foreign languages, don't you?" Caroline asked understandingly. "They are very good at it. You won't find another school like it in the United States. And you will go with us tomorrow?" Veronica continued to inquire. "That's really from ship to bowl. It took me a long time to get used to the boarding house, and you'll have to change several places at once. I remember the thing I didn't like the most was that it was like a restricted area. You can't go outside the gate without permission. The same faces everywhere. Parents come only on weekends, and they only let us go home for vacations. Teachers are old women, no one to fall in love with." That was the main reason for her longing, Caroline explained to the new girl, Veronica. "I guess it will be the same problem wherever they send us. We're behind a high fence as usual. And in the neighboring village, the male population is a couple of oxen and a shepherd at best." Ugh, Veronica reached for the dressing table. It was her main habit to look in the mirror every now and then. She would fix her golden curl, or tint her eyelashes, or simply turn her face left and right in front of the mirror, making sure that everything was all right. "Nellie, do you want to come along? I'll show you the guest house, where everything is." The new girl hesitated for a couple of moments, and then sincerely asked, "Why?" Nellie knew she was unlikely to return here, but the girls looked at the new girl strangely. Once more they were convinced of this when they went to bed. They were used to long chats before going to bed, but now there was a new person in the room, and the girls arranged the conversation so as not to mention anything personal, but at the same time to touch on such topics that Nellie could join in the conversation. But the new girl was silent. She was awake. She turned over from side to side, sighed, but she did not say a word. But in the morning, when the girls woke up, Nellie was already ready. She was sitting on the made-up bed, fully dressed. Her bag stood at her feet. The new girl was looking out the window. At another time, the flower beds and stone-paved paths would have seemed very beautiful to her. But on this day, it was a grey, rainy morning, and the courtyard looked uncomfortable. She wanted to wrap herself in a warm blanket and go back to sleep. "God, why did you get up so early?" Caroline wondered, "We're not in the army. They won't leave without us. As soon as Angelica knocks on our door, we can count down 2 more hours. Veronica won't get ready before then anyway." And really only after the mentor walked lightly down the corridor and beat a light beat with her fingers on each door, the guest house began to come to life. A huge white tourist bus had already slowly pulled into the courtyard, and the girls were still sitting in the dining room, drinking cocoa with hot buns and chatting. No one was in a hurry. Natalie came in and clapped her hands, waiting for the noise to die down. "If any of you are fans of the movie Home Alone, we can provide," she said. "Why the bus? Why not a plane?" Nancy grumbled. "It's a long drive." Nancy's voice was hoarse, maybe because she smoked a lot in secret. Of course, she knew it, because Nancy smelled like tobacco a mile away. But the main thing was to keep the rule, not to smoke openly, not to get caught with a cigarette in front of the teachers. Ira went along with it. She followed the rules. The girls singled out Nancy. First of all, she always had expensive cigarettes, and secondly, she was a computer god. She knew programs as well as a computer teacher. "We've already explained it to you several times," Natalie sighed. "There's a virus running rampant in the world. On the bus, contact will be kept to a minimum, and on the plane, in airports. Anyway, in 15 minutes, I'm waiting for everyone in the courtyard. Boarding is starting, and we left in an hour." Lucy, a short girl, with a face as delicate as a baby's, was the last to emerge from the boarding house, her eyes half closed, her movements slow. It was impossible to imagine her in a hurry. Looking at Lucy, she seemed to be dozing all the time, eyes half closed, movements slow, and in a hurry. It was impossible to imagine. She was the best in the boarding house in foreign languages. Caroline promised her a career in the travel business. "I might want to be a diplomat. I like civilization, amenities, figuratively speaking, caviar on a silver tray. All this field life is not for me." Lucy wrinkled her nose. Mosquitoes, nature, Earth. Now she didn't want to go at all, but she didn't want to stay alone in a boarding house. "I don't need manna from heaven. I just want a bath, and a cozy apartment. With or without a mezzanine. I'd like a villa, I'd like a summer house. And a Mercedes. Right, Lucy?" Nancy was pushing her overweight bag into the luggage compartment. "Hey, girls, you can't sit in the front 2 seats. Natalie and I already took them." "Nancy, what kind of expression is that, girls?" "Pardon me, Natalie. Girls, don't take the best seats because they're meant for Natalie and I's ass." Natalie just waved her hand, and Nellie found herself alone on the bus. She hadn't managed to make friends with anyone during that 24 hours, and to tell the truth, she hadn't done anything for that. That's no good. She needed to learn more about these girls, their habits, their dreams, even their whims, if she was to live with them, until her father decided to move her elsewhere. But right now, Nellie had no regrets about being alone in the back row the whole way. She covered her eyes and felt the bus move, slowly pulling on. "It's all right," she told the teacher. "Let them do as they please. There won't be any guests here till fall anyway. Except for you. And you are." Natalie began. "I'm Mallory, the cook. I'll be cooking for your girls." "That's great. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of entertainment here. So, Mallory, we'd appreciate it if you could teach our girls something simple. You know, bake buns or something. They need something to keep them busy. I understand it's best to stay close to the estate. On the road, why not? Let them walk. I ride my bike home to the village myself. There's our village on the other side of the lake. You can still get there by motorboat. But just in the forest, it's really better not to go alone. The local kids go, but your girls are pampered. They might get into trouble." "Like what?" Natalie asked quickly. Mallory hesitated. "Well, the first thing is the marshes. It doesn't take long for a girl to be tempted by berries, a clearing, a step, and she's in the mire. Our locals always try to walk in 2s and 3s. If one falls through, the other pulls him out. A snake bites. Also, not deadly, of course, but unpleasant. We still need to get to medical help. Can't you call an ambulance here? In the 21st century? Mallory shook her head. You can't even get a signal out here all the time. Sometimes the phones go dead, and that's it. So the best thing to do is to get the victim into a motorboat and get to the other side of the river. There is a medical center there, and if it is closed, the paramedic lives in the village itself. You can run straight home to her. Yes, Angelica was very calm, but she couldn't take it anymore. I doubt if there will ever be a tourist center here. I wouldn't even recommend it to hunters. Why not? Mallory's voice was full of resentment. If the old Earl's place is the one they'll definitely come to. Especially those young, crazy people. I beg your pardon. Natalie looked puzzled. What count? We're in his house now. Mallory's tone changed. If she had been shy before, as if she were embarrassed to speak in front of the city women, she knew the subject, and her embarrassment disappeared. I keep saying, if it were in Europe, they'd probably burn him at the stake, that Billy. We say, Mallory lowered her voice, that he was deported. And not for any treason, not for freethinking, not for embezzlement, not for dueling, but he was a ghoul. Who? Angelica even wrinkled her nose. Him. And at the same time, the first in his time, handsome and rich, I saw the portrait. They're all funny-looking men in those old portraits. White faces, like women's, delicate. Wigs, and they wore makeup, these gentlemen. Mallory, you're confusing the 18th century with the 18th century. Well, it's all the same. They're just so refined, so feminine. And Billy, you can't take your eyes off him. His gaze is fiery, his features are outlined with a chisel. I'm telling the truth, it's his charm, it's through the ages. You stand in front of the portrait, ready to fall in love with the canvas and the colors. I guess not many women could resist him in life. But Billy was unmarried and never had a bride. But he brought up serf girls, and that's all, as soon as they were brought to his estate. So in a short time, they were as if in water. And there was no trace of them. It seems that he had a secret cemetery in the forest, about which only one of his closest servants knew. And if the master was as handsome as an angel, then this servant was scarier than the devil himself. A one-eyed one at that. At that time, the authorities did not stand up for the serf's brother, or rather, sister. And for a long time this case did not come to light. Until at last, the parents of one of the girls found an opportunity to come and throw themselves at the feet of an important person. Mallory put her hand to her cheek as they began to investigate, and it turned out that there was a graveyard full of girls who had disappeared. If the Earl had really sent them to the next world. That's when they sent Billy here to the middle of nowhere. And they say he accepted the Tsar's sentence without objection. He didn't want to live in the village. He settled on this peninsula, and they built him a house here. Rumors spread quickly, and no local woman wanted to serve the Baron. The people knew that he had several men in his servants, and the chief over them was this one-eyed devil. They also noticed that from time to time the only road that leads here is hidden by fog, and then it is impossible to get to the Count's house at all. It's like a blind man traveling off-road. It wasn't like that before, only since the Lord settled here. And when girls started to disappear in the village, people went to the local priest in a crowd. He was an old priest, over 80 years old. He said, "Get out of here. Move so far away that even the longest winter night would not reach you. I can't bless you to go with stakes against the Baron or to burn his house. Neither you nor I will be well off. Go away." And the village was deserted for a long time. It was probably much later, after the Civil War, that people began to settle here. The Count's house stood abandoned. They tried to open something here, an orphanage, an office of some kind, but it was inconveniently far away, on the outskirts of the village, and there was this fog. It descends on the peninsula from time to time, closing it from the world. Where's the Count gone? He's buried nearby, Mallory explained, but we don't know what he died of. There's a rumor going around. Some people say that without fresh blood, the Earl grew old and died. Others say that a priest was left in the village, and it was he who killed him with his prayers. It's also known that the crypt with Billy's body was near the church, inside the church fence. It's all destroyed now, torn apart. Of course, there were those who broke into the crypt. They thought they could make a fortune there. And the church, first the new authorities made it a warehouse, then it fell into disrepair. Now there are only ruins there. But the body? Did they find the body? I don't know anything. Mallory shook her head. Maybe the one who first entered the crypt, the one who saw the coffin, the deceased himself. But no one would admit to it. Everyone I talked to said there was nothing there. It was empty. We thought the Count's house would suffer the same fate. It would fall into ruin. But no, young people came here, walked around, wowed, 19th century mansion, beautifully preserved, and decided to make it a tourist attraction. They finished one wing. Now guests come here from time to time. Well, more rich men, to go fishing, then to take a bath. The fishing here is excellent. I make soup out of the catch every time and serve it to them with vodka. But if we declare these lands the final resting place of the ghoul, then all sorts of crazy people will come here in droves. You know, the kind who dress in black, spend nights in graveyards. That's what I meant when I said you could make a name for yourself. I was very surprised that the girls were brought here. Of course, nothing's happened here for 1,000 years, but people still think it's a bad place, especially for such young girls. It so happened that Nellie was alone. All the girls are in rooms of 2. Angeliki decided to settle in 3s, and now Nellie had no roommate. And it was the farthest room, right by the stairs. Caroline looked in, her eyebrows narrowed pitifully. Well, do you want? Let's ask Angelica, and you and Veronica will move in with us. Nellie shook her head. She realized that, in fact, the girls didn't really want to cramp up. They hadn't had time to like the new girl or get attached to her. Caroline was just being kind. Nellie looked at her room from a special point of view. She went to the window. Neither trees nor bushes obstructed the view. Ahead was the green lawn, beyond it the surface of the lake. The village is visible on the other shore. The roofs of the houses, the dark purple bricks of the dilapidated church. No one can approach the house unnoticed. That's good. Nellie jerked the frame, realized it opened inward, and the deadbolt was tight enough that it would take a few extra seconds to get through it. The door, on the other hand, is just a hook, very flimsy, symbolic. The walls in the house were very thick, and Nellie could not hear what was going on in the next room. But the sounds from the corridor could be heard perfectly well, and the creaking of the floorboards. They, too, would be her watchmen. These creaking floorboards would warn her of what was going on. Later, Nellie heard Mallory's story. She wanted to pass on, but the words about the Earl and the thick fog made her linger, stand by the stairs where her companions could not see her. There she stood until the women had finished speaking. The voices of the teachers were hard, confident, exhorting. Nellie realized that they did not believe the cook at all. They considered everything she had said to be local legends. "Please don't tell the girls these horror stories," Natalie asked. "Even though they're big girls, they might be frightened of the black hand or the red spot. Ariana is a great storyteller. She'll scare you so badly that you'll scream, and Angelica, and I'll be running around the room with Valerian half the night. Do you know how it goes in our boarding house? Lighters. But they didn't go out that day. Angelique promised they'd do it later. She'd arrange a boatman, and they'd all go to the village on the other side. They could even go on foot around the lake, and it would be a real hike. And now the request is not to go far from the camp, from the manor, except to go down to the beach and to the bridges." Then Mallory called them to lunch. The dining room was small, not like the one at the boarding house. At the boarding house they had a whole room to themselves, but here they were at home at one table. The window was ajar, and the rain-washed garden smelled so sweetly of freshness and roses. Mallory carried on a tray bowls of steaming borscht, potatoes and mushrooms. She also had her specialty, raspberry kissel. When a ray of sunlight fell on the glasses, they burned with a soft opalescent light. And even Nancy, who was so proud of her slim waist, couldn't refuse the sugar-sweetened buns. "Girls, I'm gonna be such a Quasimodo in here." She unzipped her skirt. Nancy: "Girls, I'm going to do my best to keep my figure." Happy, Natalie. Naomi, on the other hand, wasn't fat. It was surprisingly harmonious with her soft personality, a gentle voice. Naomi stood at the window, looking thoughtfully at the lake, and suggested, "Let's go for a walk." Everyone agreed except Casey. Casey got so sick on the way that her mentors persuaded her to go down to the dining room and put something in her mouth. But she still didn't feel well, and now she said she was going to try to get a couple hours of sleep. "I was up all night on that goddamn bus. Now I'm sitting up and my eyes are closing." They let her go in peace. It was only a short walk to the beach, a path to the shore, that's all. However, this place could be called a beach only conditionally. Just a strip of sand, about 10 meters long. If they ever open a tourist resort here, such a patch will definitely not be enough. But the water was clean and warm, and the bottom was sandy too. There were no stones, not even small ones. At first, the girls regretted that they had gone for a walk without changing into swimsuits beforehand. Some of them returned to the room after them. Lenka brought a ball and began to play in it, going into the water. It was very convenient if you missed the ball, and it was floating next to you. You didn't have to bend down. Nellie sat on the bridge, not joining any of the little companies. The girls didn't go anywhere else. They sunbathed and swam until it started to get dark. "Girls, are the windows here not open at all?" Naomi asked at breakfast. It was so hot at night. I tried to open the window. "Well, let the mosquitoes. I brought Raptor with me. But I thought at least I would breathe the night air." I tugged on the frame, nothing. Now I had to take a pill for my headache. Nellie had her head down and was tracing patterns on the jam with a teaspoon. I was hot, too. Veronica yawned, covering her mouth with her palm, but I went downstairs, opened the door and sat on the porch. "Oh, Nellie, why are you looking at me like that?" Nellie hastily averted her eyes so that Veronica wouldn't read the horror in them. "Girls, let's go for a walk to the village today," Caroline suggested, stirring her tea. "That's what the chauffeur told us yesterday. We won't go by boat, we'll walk along the shore, bypassing it. What are we going to do here all day? Swimming again?" "No, I understand. The isolation here is great, but it's boring, and there's no internet. You can't watch a movie." "Angelica, can you let me go?" Natalie asked the teacher who had just entered the dining room. "Eh? What? Where to?" When Angelica heard about the girls' plans, she volunteered to go with them. She realized that it would be impossible to keep the young people on the estate. These are not fishermen hunting. The girls would be looking for fun. Mallory told her that it was a long way to the village, but there was a good road. It would be much worse if the young people went to the ancient ruins of the city of the dead. There it was necessary to know perfectly well the narrow path between the swamps. It was better not to go without a chaperone. The girls gathered leisurely, though Angelica was in a hurry. "If we want to be back by lunchtime, it's a long way. We can only get there and back in time. We don't have bicycles like Mallory, and we don't have a boat either." But while Natalie was running for her hat and Betty was looking for her camera, which had fallen to the bottom of her bag, Veronica was pouring water into a bottle. "You're the only one with discipline," Angelica praised Nellie, who had been standing next to her for a long time, waiting for the other girls. In fact, the distance was even greater than they had anticipated, and the road was boring. The forest on both sides, and there was no end to it. The girls' legs were tired, and Nellie's eyes were tired. She looked around continuously, trying not to attract the attention of others. Was there anything unusual, something she needed to remember? Everything was quiet. When they finally reached the village, they were disappointed. It was a poor place. A few dusty streets, scattered far from each other, houses all as one modest. No one lived here richly. That's all. A store that looked like a barn was the only one. And, of course, they sell everything from bread to winter boots. Nancy snorted as she ran off the porch. Well, at least we'll know where to buy lemonade and toothpaste. Caroline tried to reassure her. Look, Selina pointed. Aren't those the ruins of the temple? You're sharp-eyed, Angelica wondered. I wouldn't have noticed. It was indeed once a church, but not only were the domes gone, but the bell tower was almost destroyed. The plaster had crumbled almost completely, exposing the crimson bricks. The whole place was thickly overgrown with grass, and lilac bushes crowded in, covering both the church and the cemetery that stretched behind it. Come on, let's go and see. Natalie lit up. And if we cannot go in there? Objected, however, not categorically, Angelica, hurrying after the girls. Bricks fall from the ceiling there. Yeah, and right on our heads. Nancy stumbled, not noticing the groove, hidden by the honey-scented yellow flowers. What air there was! Caroline was indifferent to old architecture, and she was in a dreamy mood. She liked everything here. The sunny, warm day, the vast sky. You don't see it like this in the city, from horizon to horizon. And the clouds as light as white fluff. And this path they were walking on, with wildflowers on both sides. White, blue, purple. You could pick a bunch in 5 minutes. As they approached the church, it became clear that the place was not entirely abandoned. Here, next to it, there was a prayer house, an obvious novelty, a rectangular brick structure, an icon of St. Nicholas above the entrance. People did not restore the old temple. The destruction was already irreversible. It was easier to demolish, and a large construction people could not cope. Not for the money, but the places prayed, so they put here this house, where believers gathered on weekends and holidays. The door opened, and a tall young man in a black monk's robe stood on the threshold. He must have heard voices and decided to welcome the guests. How many of you there are? He turned to the girls, surprised and happy. Have you come for a tour? We are, said Nancy. We are from the old manor, explained Angelica, blotting her sweating forehead with a handkerchief. City girls who will be vacationing here in the summer. So here we are. Today we have some local sightseeing. Interested in the temple? It deserves it. Built in the 18th century. See the bricks. They used to add eggs to the lime mortar for strength. And after the revolution, the first thing they did was to remove the bells from the church, load them on a barge, and take them for melting. But there was a miracle. The bells somehow slipped into the water and sank. The matter was at night. During the day people dived, but they could not find them anywhere. So now they lie at the bottom of the lake and wait for their time. It is not Kitechgrad here, of course, but the lake still has its wonders. Nellie approached, and almost for the first time the girls heard her voice. What may I call you? Father Steve. Steve? The young man smiled a little shyly. It's a tradition that the parish here is served by a monk in the rank of priest. Father Steve, and the crypt. The one where the old count was buried, it's here too, isn't it? What's left of it? Oh, that. The monk's face became sullen. Have you heard enough of our local horror stories? Are you into the otherworldly too? It's a big sin. If you're believers, you should confess it. How many of you are Orthodox? Several girls raised their hands, just like in school, but Nellie didn't turn around. She looked Father Steve straight in the eye. Show me this place, please, she asked. And there was something in her tone. The monk shrugged and led the girls down the path. There was little left of the old church fence, stones lying in the grass. All the rest had long ago been scattered by the locals for construction, for fixing their houses. A few graves were inside the fence. The rest of the cemetery was on the other side of it. But here, inside, almost on the border, near the gate, there was a stone structure surprisingly well preserved. It reminded the girls of something even fairy tale-like. The entrance was framed by 2 columns, a pointed spire, stone carvings, steps, a rusty iron door, a metal pattern, crosses. The day was dry and warm, but here, in this corner, there was obvious dampness, and so the moss hid the base. Here, Father Steve said with a slight chuckle, pointing to the crypt, only there is no authentic evidence of the old Count's connection with demons. A sinner, of course, but who's without sins? But he gave a lot of money to the parish, and a lot of it, yes. The iron door was ajar, and, of course, all the girls hurried into the crypt. What was inside? It was empty and uninteresting. A small space where all the boarders could barely fit. Dirty walls, damp, cold. The thick stone walls did not let the summer heat in. Isn't there a dead man? Nancy's sharp voice came from the crypt. That's how stupid they are, Angelica said in an apologetic tone, trying to smooth things over, and then raised her voice. Ira, we were told the crypt was empty a long time ago. Nellie managed to squat down in the crowd of boarders. She ran her hand over the stone slabs and said, he was lying over there, under the floor. Where? Nancy squatted so sharply that she almost bumped her forehead. Help me move the slab, just a little. Immediately, hands reached for the stove in unison. Thin fingers, manicured fingernails, someone's exclamation. Oh girls, hold on, don't drop, or she'll kick me now. I managed to lift the slab and push it away. It's good that Angelica didn't see it. Well, what do you see? Casey demanded. She, because of her size, was especially difficult to squeeze between the girls. There's nothing there, Natalie answered disappointedly, bending over. It's like a cellar, just for storing potatoes. There was probably a coffin in there. One or more. Convenient. You don't have to dig a grave, and you can look at the dearly departed at any time. Shall we close up? We're gonna get in trouble, Betty said. Wait a minute. Nellie sat down and froze. Yes, there was no one there for a long time. Natalie was right. The underground room looked like a cellar. The church thieves had long ago taken everything, if anything, from here. There wasn't even a candle burner left. Just bare stone and darkness. And all those girls, you know, the ones who disappeared, is that true? Fiction? Angelica asked Steve's father. Oh please, there were a lot of people dying back then. It's quite possible that there was some epidemic, smallpox, cholera. The dead were buried separately, not in the common cemetery. I haven't looked up the documents, you know. There's enough already. Recently, these very same, either psychics or ufologists came here, and some of them are baptized. I say to them, say, work for the glory of God, help me in the old church, take out the garbage. There are frescoes preserved there. I keep hoping, maybe for their sake, the church will start to restore. No, let them into the crypt, that's all. And everyone was asking me if I knew anything else about the old Count. Why must a monk, not just a priest, serve here? What kind of tradition is that? Nellie brushed her blonde hair off her forehead. Steve just waved his hand. Ah, it's a tradition from the time when the prayers of an old monk brought this place to life. You're bringing me back to this topic again. They were not only ungodly late for lunch, but almost missed dinner. It became clear that it would be impossible to go to the village often. It was too far away. Everyone was tired, and the girls complained that their legs hurt. Mallory sympathized and promised that the next time they decided to make a trip, they would make arrangements with the boatman, as it would be quicker and easier. The porridge prepared by the cook did not arouse enthusiasm. They were hungry, but, as Casey said, not that hungry. They started gutting their supplies, pulling out the last of the things they had in their bags after the long journey. Mallory left immediately after dinner, saddling up on her old bicycle, just as the dust was gathering. The girls took the moment to make coffee, to feel like mistresses in the kitchen. Selena found bread and made toast. They didn't sit in the dining room, but at the long board table by the stove, drank coffee, and didn't leave for a long time. They discussed the trip to the village and agreed that everyone would like the crypt to be a little scarier. Well, like Stephen King, when you read a book, and then in his own house afraid to go to the bathroom at night, said Angelica. But if all this was true, where was the Count hiding the bodies? Naomi shuddered slightly. Maybe in these very swamps, in the marshes. Tied them up with something heavy, and now they're all wandering around as ghosts. Nancy wrung her hands and admired the shadows they cast on the walls. From scary stories, the conversation turned to the mundane topic of what to do tomorrow. It seemed that now every evening she would have to think about what to do the next day. An endlessly long summer day. Swim until exhaustion. Learn to fish. Check the nearby forest if there are no mushrooms and berries. Angelica listened a little, smiling. When the girls fell silent, not finally agreeing on anything, she said with a slight smile, "I've made a deal with someone here. Tomorrow the local guys will bring you horses. You can ride." Veronica even clapped her hands. She was so happy. Just listen carefully to what they tell you. The guys know horses, and if I'm not mistaken, there are no experienced riders among you, Natalie instructed. Naomi returned. No one had noticed that she had already gone to bed, and said irritably, "Who in my room has screwed the window on that very wire again? It took me half an hour to unscrew it this morning. I can't sleep in the air. Who's got a mania for making braids out of wire? Go on, open up." Of course, no one confessed. Naomi left with one last thing to say. "I'm going to twist it for the last time. If it happens again tomorrow, I'll take the mattress out on the lawn and sleep there." The morning found Nellie sitting on the porch. It was that hour of dawn when some fall asleep and others wake up. Nellie realized that now she could go out. The sun was about to rise, and the fog that now swirled over the lake was no longer a threat. She got up and straightened herself with difficulty. Her legs were stiff. Nellie was cold and tired. If she could lie down under a warm blanket now, there would be no need for horses. She yawned and walked. She didn't know why. Toward the lake. Maybe because she thought she saw a figure in the fog. But there was no one and she had to go back. Veronica, in her nightgown, leaned out of the window, listening to the birds singing. "Are those nightingales?" She called to Nellie. "I can't tell them apart at all, but they sing in a way that makes my heart weep." Breakfast did not arouse enthusiasm. For some reason, all the cooks of the world, if it is an organized feeding, whether it is children in kindergarten or ailing in the sanatorium, cooks always in the morning cook porridge. The smell of hot milk made Nellie start to feel slightly nauseous. Veronica smeared the porridge with a spoon. She didn't want to upset Mallory, so she pretended to eat, or at least she was about to start. Caroline sighed and said to no one in particular, "I like to put caviar on my sandwich at home in the morning, and a cup or two of tea, of course." Nancy gave the plate a look of disgust. "I'm going for a smoke," she said. If there were teachers around, Nancy managed to say the word smoke like a ventriloquist without moving her lips. You couldn't tell who said it, or if she said it at all. A few of the girls looked at her. All of them could not leave immediately after her. Otherwise, Angelica would immediately raise her voice. "Where are you all rushing off to?" "Well, back." We were silent for a minute. "Well, no one dreamed of any ghosts?" Naomi asked, more to change the subject. Nellie raised her head and looked closely at the girls. As no one answered, Naomi went on. "I thought I'd sleep on my feet after last night's walk. I've only had one period in my life when I had very vivid dreams, as they say nowadays, triples. But that was after antidepressants. My parents were getting divorced. I was crying all the time, and my doctor prescribed them. Girls, there was such a strange feeling, as if you live in a different reality and do not want to leave it. And then yesterday, that is, tonight, again. But I haven't taken any pills for a long time. And the only sedative I have with me is an aroma pendant with molasses. If Nancy hadn't left, she would have said that other people's dreams are the most boring thing imaginable. But Nancy wasn't there, so Nellie asked, "What did you dream?" "My dead brother," Naomi said. "I still think he's the reason my parents split up. We were little. I was 8, Anthony was 3. And my mum let us out to play in the yard. You know, an 8-year-old kid, right? You forget you're with a little kid. You turn your back. You're a little kid yourself," Natalie said. "And girls, I still don't know how the car hit him." She hid her face in the palms of her hands. Her silky long hair fell on the table, becoming her second line of defense against other people's gazes. So much time has passed, and I still can't tell it all coherently. I just remember bits and pieces, like dots and dashes. Well, don't. No, I'll tell you, because first there was a short scream, something absolutely inhuman. Then immediately, well, it was not immediately, of course, it all merged for me. Ambulance under flashing lights. My mom and I are both there. I hold on very tightly, because the car is rushing so fast that I think I'm about to be torn from the seat, and I'll hang like in weightlessness. And these turns in Medgarodok along the paths, here and there, I was skidding. Then the adults all jump on the ground one by one, the stretcher rattles, and I get out last, by myself. Everyone forgot about me. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting alone in the hallway. No mom, no one. I realize that everything is with Anthony, and I wait, petrified with horror. And then, after an eternity, they're in the office behind me. The phone rings and one nurse says to another, "A boy has died." And I went in and I said, "Dead?" I don't know what they saw on my face because they both rushed over to comfort me. "No, honey, everything is fine." And I don't remember anything else, not even the funeral. Now, I think my father never forgave my mother for that, for sending Anthony to the yard with just me. She didn't go herself, didn't look after me. From then on, we were not a family, but like fragments. If you say the wrong word, look at something of Jerkins that comes under your hand. It's as if you cut yourself deeply and painfully. There was silence for a moment. Naomi perked up. "So, tonight I dreamt I was at home, and Anthony came into my room. He's a big, grown-up guy. He's wearing a black hoodie with a hood, and he's taking my paintings off the wall, picking up my stuff off the table. He's got a big gym bag in his hands, and he's putting everything in it. I ask him, 'What are you doing?' He says, 'Show me what else is yours and I'll take it with me. And I'll take you with me.' I don't realize in my dream that he is dead, and I help him. I give him one thing and another so that I don't forget anything. And then we go ashore. It's so early in the morning that you can't tell whether it's still night or dawn. There's a fog over the lake, only over the water, as if it were not a lake, but some kind of smoking bowl. There are thick reeds on the shore, and my brother has a boat hidden there. I follow him and ask, 'Will you help me into the boat? I'm so clumsy. Is it deep? Are there leeches?' And he's already in the boat, standing in his black hoodie, with his back to me, and he's not holding an oar, but a pole. My brother says, 'You stay here, I'll be right behind you.'" Miss Tika, Nancy came back smelling so much of cigarette smoke that she would have been in trouble if Angelica had been there. "They say you dream of the dead when the weather changes." Veronica, as always, wanted to reassure everyone. She could see that Naomi was uncomfortable. They finished breakfast in silence, and then Veronica volunteered to help Mallory clear the table and wash the dishes. The girls had not yet had a chance to leave the dining room when there was a clatter of heels. Natalie, even here in the field, did not allow herself to relax. Her hair was smoothly combed, her dark blue suit, a string of pearls around her neck, heeled shoes, as if it were not the estate of an old count, lost on a peninsula, but the native walls of a boarding house. Natalie looked around at all her charges. The girls knew from experience that it was hard to hide anything from her gaze. She would notice everything from a hole in their tights to a boarder's bad mood. I said, "We're not going anywhere. We have an interesting program for today. Studying what grows around the house, learning to tell the difference between a dandelion and a forget-me-not, counting crows," Nancy began in her ventriloquist whisper. Natalie headed straight for her. She held out her open palm. "Cigarettes." "Bummer. Nancy, searching is not my style, but you won't be out of the manor for the rest of the vacation. It's up to you. Either you give me the cigarettes now, or I'm locking your room up. I'll move your roommate over to Nellie's, and you'll be a prisoner of the castle of If. I want you to breathe clean air here, not poison yourself. You have one lung for life." Natalie generally knew the futility of this fight. Nancy had been smoking since she was 12, and now, of course, she had her stash of smokes tucked away. So taking one pack away from her now wouldn't make much difference. But Nancy would have to hide her cigarettes even more carefully, and do her best not to get caught. If she pretended that the teachers didn't notice, tomorrow half the girls would start smoking cigarettes without hiding. Naomi, while everyone was distracted by Nancy with her pack of cigarettes in the inside pocket of her jacket, Nellie quietly tugged the girl's sleeve. "You can't go away with me for a quarter of an hour. They said not to go anywhere. We'll be right back. We'll walk to the lake. Do you remember the place you dreamed about?" "Yeah, I think so," Naomi said uncertainly. "There was this little grove, an aspen grove. The moon was shining, and the leaves fluttered in the breeze and looked silver. It was beautiful. Can you show me?" "Why?" Naomi was surprised. Nellie looked at her in silence. "Really? Why?" "Maybe I had the same dream." She answered the question with a question. "The lake, the fog, I want to check." She couldn't explain anything yet. There were mysteries in front of her that had to be solved before someone, or something, would come to their senses. Surprisingly, Naomi, who suffered from what she called geographic cretinism, compounded by the fact that she couldn't navigate at all without her glasses, found the place she had dreamed about. Exactly, she was happily surprised. "Wow, it's exactly like my dream. Only now there is absolutely no night creepiness here. Of course, in the daytime, in the sunshine. But believe me, I wasn't scared even then. Some people are afraid of dead people, but I missed Yoka so much that I was happy to see him. Honestly, I woke up and my pillow was wet. I didn't want him to leave." "I believe so," Nellie said briefly. She was used to looking around differently than the others. She didn't look around, didn't take a few futile steps in each direction. Forward, backward, what's there? She stood there, frozen, her eyes moving from object to object. At times like this, she thought she could see even with her back. She didn't have to turn around to see danger. "The subconscious mind is an amazing thing," Naomi said knowingly. "I must have memorized this place yesterday afternoon when we were walking here, and now I've seen it. The aspens are just ordinary during the day, and their leaves are green. At night, they were much more beautiful, like silver coins. They seemed to jingle. Do you happen to know why the aspen is considered a mystical tree? Well there, the aspen stake in the legends." Nellie shuddered a little. "Because Judas Iscariot hanged himself on an aspen tree. That's how it's believed. That's why the ancients believed the tree could overcome evil forces. Thank you for bringing me here. I didn't expect to find it." Naomi continued to marvel. "Does it look like what you were dreaming about? And we should probably get back." At a gallop, Nellie said, to avoid answering the last question. Yes, she didn't doubt it. Everything was ordinary. An ordinary, not even a very well-trodden path winded along the shore of the lake. The reeds grew thickly on the right. They left a passage to the big water. A narrow boat could pass through here. But then there would be footprints on the shore. But there were no footprints, even the grass was not mown. Behind the aspen grove there was a real forest, a dense wall of trees. I could only walk a little ahead along the path to see what was there. But there was really no time. Nellie restrained herself from talking to Naomi. She was anxious to have a friend among the girls. The promised interesting program was horses. In the courtyard of the manor, there was a joyful excitement. The horses were already saddled by two boys. Both were dressed very simply. Some quilted jackets of protective color, the same pants, dusty boots. But one of the guys had a very rustic look, and it was obvious that he was terribly shy of so many girls. In any case, no one heard his voice. Barry, the second guy, introduced himself. He was dark, short, pleasant-looking, and Veronica licked her lips involuntarily. She had pink lipstick on, slightly shiny, and smelled like caramel. Angelica explained that Barry was the owner of the equestrian club nearby, and now they were all going horseback riding. At first, there seemed to be a lot of horses, but there were only as many horses as there were girls and escorts. The horses are the simplest, Bashkas, short, with big heads, and one of the boarders hummed a little. Nellie realized that ordinary girls would have been delighted and rushed to feed and pet the horses. But here were the elite. Some of the boarders had been riding for a long time, and some of them had their own stables at home. The most she had learned was to approach a horse without fear and to climb up without support. "Where are we going?" Nancy asked. She did not hesitate long and was already in the saddle. She had chosen a single white stallion from a small herd, and his eyes were blue. "What's his name?" "Lemon," Barry answered. Of course, everyone immediately started taking the horses apart and asking their names. Lucia had to be put in the saddle, and 3 of them, besides Jenya, Angelica, and Natalie, were pushing her up. Natalie couldn't take it anymore. "Maybe I shouldn't go." Naomi was immediately concerned. "I feel sorry for the horse. Her back would crack. You should see what kind of big men our horses have to carry." Barry grinned. "Under 100 pounds, and if it's a few days' hike, with backpacks and tents and all that." Beneath him was a handsome raven-haired Dariel. Most girls would not dare to approach him. The mighty horse stepped on the spot and roared a little, hurrying his master. The wife didn't need stirrups. Just standing on the ground, one elusive movement, and he was already in the saddle. "We have several routes," he said. "If you want, we will go to Trinity with an overnight stay. It's a beautiful place we've arranged. The mountains are nearby. The lake again. We'll bathe with horses. We'll weave wreaths. Jump over the fire." Angelica, feeling that she was now replacing Natalie, looked at the murmuring girls vigilantly. But, she said, We'll see. We'll see how you behave. And now we're going to the hunting lodge," Barry explained. "We've been asking for a tourist shelter for a long time, but the authorities won't let us use it. The lodge belongs to the estate, it's part of it. Was it really hunted here? Who was hunted? Are these animals still here? And who is the most dangerous one here?" Barry tried to answer all the questions at once. "The most dangerous are ticks, so it's best to wear long-sleeved clothes, boots or at least socks, and something on your head. Caps, kerchiefs. Well, you can meet a boar. Rarely, very rarely. Don't worry, I haven't seen one this year." "What a boar?" "When we went to Bakel, there's an ecological trail, and it said, 'Who where? Bears.' The guys and I asked the forester, 'Is it true that you can meet bears? What should we do then?' The man looked at us so calmly and said, 'Well, there are 3 of you. It is unlikely that they will approach. If anything, shout at them louder.' "What about snakes?" one of Angelique asked. "I saw one here, by the way." "Yeah, I heard you yelling," threw Nancy off the horse. "It wasn't even crawling. It was like a trickle of water flowing. Black and so fast, right at my feet. Most of the time, Barry explained condescendingly. If you get those yellow spots on your face, you're off the hook. You can even pick it up. A viper's more unpleasant, of course, but it won't just rush in. I was fishing the other day, and I saw such a big viper there. It was hissing and hissing, trying to scare me. Only when I touched it with my boot, then it had nowhere to go. It jumped in. But the boot, of course, could not bite through. Why did you? Nowney began, obviously about to say something along the lines of provoking the poor viper. But then Barry remembered, raised his hand, and said in Mallory's words, "Swamps, that's what I forgot to tell you. You and I will take the trail now, and we'll take the trail back. There's nothing to be afraid of. But God forbid, if you take the same route to explore what's there on the left and right, you can get into such a quagmire. You can drown 10 times before you call for help and people come. It would be good if they could find where you drowned." Barry looked around at the boarders and made sure they were all on horseback. "Let's move," he said, and let Daryl follow the trail to the woods. Barry was used to taking care of campers who were mounting horses for the first time in their lives, and often they were stiff, uncomfortable, shaky, and scared. That's why the horses, except Daryl, were so phlegmatic that it was extremely difficult to make them trot. And under the saddles, besides the voltraps, lay the furs. Barry, who rode in front, warned of every branch overhanging the path, and his assistant, Mike, who closed the cavalcade, was vigilant to see that none of the horses bucked, though they could hardly think of it. The day was so clear and warm, sunny and serene, that any mysticism seemed like a dream. If not dreamed in a dream, then glimpsed in a reverie. Even the shadows were cheerful now. The leaves fluttered, the branches swayed, the grass swayed. The shadows were playing with people and with each other. Angelica, who was quite fit on her horse, called out to Barry, "Perhaps you will tell us now about the place we are going to." Yes, of course." Barry raised his voice so that everyone, including Michael, could hear him. It was originally all one. What would now say a project, a complex, and the hunting lodge was built even earlier than the manor house. They did it quickly. It was supposed that here, first of all, the Count himself would live while the big estate was being built. Secondly, it was easier to get here from the mainland and back, and thirdly, here you can really not be afraid of flooding. The lake overflows in the spring. We say hunting lodge, but in fact, today in our understanding it is a hut in the forest. But this is a beautiful cottage. Well, it was, and in his time, when the Count was alive, he often went there. "Hunting?" Lucy asked. "I don't think so. There were so many animals there in his day that hunters couldn't get rid of wolves for a long time afterward. There were even bears here. It was unlikely that an avid hunter would have animals walking right under his nose. Nowadays it is difficult to meet a wolf. He can smell a man from afar and hides. I only once last year, when we were camping with tourists, heard a howl at night and came to look. It wasn't a full-grown wolf, it was just a teenage wolf. Still, he realized that I was nearby and only gray heels glistened. And then, the old wolf could sit on the edge of the thicket and look at people. What are you going to do? So I think the master's temper was peculiar, and he would just leave here so no one could find him. No guests, no surprise visitors. So what was he doing here anyway? Casey kept up. Barry shrugged. The hell knows. Probably reading. They said there was a big library here. Maybe he was writing his memoirs. Two things that might seem surprising are that the servants' quarters are one small room. Apparently, the Count didn't like servants either. There was no chapel or anything to do with religion. Was he a pagan or something? And after his death, the place was abandoned first. Why? It was Angelica who asked. It's a deep forest. The lake is far away. What's there to do? The Count had no hares left, and none of the locals would have thought of going hunting so far away and using such houses. They want everything simple. A simple hut in the woods with a stove and wood, and that's enough. Even now, when they begin to restore the estate, no one remembers about the hunting lodge. It is quite badly destroyed. There are no roads to bring construction materials. And again, tourists get bored in the forest. They want a lake, a beach. I've got my eye on the cabin. It suited us, I mean the club. We could go there by horseback. It's 2 hours. It's convenient. We could make a break there. We could at least use the first floor as a shelter. And if we stay there for one night, people would also be interested. You know, they would tell different legends. The atmosphere there is suitable for that. Inside, of course, everything had been plundered. Only the walls remained, but the architecture. It became clear when the riders reached the place. The house lived in a clearing surrounded by a forest. Exactly the feeling was formed, not standing, but living. Becoming a part of this place, it greeted the dawns here, survived the winters. At night, it was illuminated by the greenish moon, and in spring the roads to it became impassable. In fact, it was only in summer that one could come here to see this enchanted prince, who could not be awakened from his heavy sleep. The house was indeed small, but it surprised with its architecture at the first glance. Though it was indeed badly damaged, the roof was gone, and the walls, once covered with white plaster, were now stripped of it, revealing dark red bricks. There are 2 columns at the entrance and a small tower on the right, a tetrahedron where the tall, narrow windows are still intact, 3 on each side of the world. Are we going to have a picnic inside? Casey asked with eager curiosity. No, Barry laughed. We'd have to clean the place up first. Look at the inside. It's all junk. There's not even anything left that's good enough for a fire. But don't go upstairs. The stairs are decrepit. You hear that, girls? Did you all hear? Angelica asked with pressure. Only downstairs you can walk very carefully. The girls jumped off their horses, and some of them slid down. No one thought of tying up their horse or taking care of it. They were all in a hurry to get home. And if it had not been for Mike, who had taken care of the little herd, there was still to be learned that prudence, without which there was no way, especially when help was far away. Barry was right, though. There wasn't much to see inside the house. Empty rooms, 2 small ones, one for the servants and one for the kitchen. There was a hall with a fireplace, and a bright room with a bay window, perhaps the master's study or library. The panes had long since been knocked out, of course. There was little left of the twisted metal staircase to climb the tower. Something strange was happening to Nellie. She was the last to enter the house, but she saw something different from the others. She saw something different. Her mind was all jumbled up. A child of the 21st century, she could only compare what was happening to a 3-decade movie theater, when you see and feel what no one outside the walls knows. Could she be going crazy already? Even for sure, it was as if Nellie lived in today's day, but she also belonged to that bygone era. It was as if she had lived in this house for years and could remember what she had done yesterday, and think of what she would do tomorrow. In the hall, where the other girl's eyes had seen shabby floorboards and a dilapidated, failing ceiling, she saw smooth floorboards of a strange, almost black wood, a sofa covered with green cloth. Part of the wall above the fireplace was stone, and a fire burned in the hearth itself, and its glare cast reflections, shadows and shadows, all of which gave birth to a huge face or face. Was it a monster or some ancient demon whose image appeared before her? Had imagination alone created him? And what kind of man could sit here for hours, tossing wood on the fire, staring mesmerized at the ugly features, the stretched black lips that curved as if to whisper something? Mother, Nancy touched Nellie's shoulder. Are you going to eat or what? It's the last of the spatchcock left in there. The girls will eat it all up, and you'll be left to chew grass with the horses. In the afternoon, the weather suddenly turned bad, and it rained. And it was not a noisy and fleeting downpour, which is only a joy. What clean air afterwards, how it smells like flowers and herbs, and everything around, bright and shining, washed by the hand of the sky. No, this rain was cold and cold. Maybe it would be sunny again, Veronica asked hopefully. The words, however, were addressed to nowhere, as was the hope of clear weather. Mallory shook her head. My grandfather used to say, if it rains in the morning, put on a hat and drive out of the yard. And if it rains in the afternoon, I'm not going anywhere. That's what I was afraid of. Lucy's face was as impenetrable as ever. When you all got so excited. The old manor house, the countryside, the first rain, and we're all locked in here. It'll be damp and cold and boring. There's nowhere to go. The house is old. It's not just a split system. You'd be afraid to turn on the heater. What are we gonna do till tonight, huh? Would you like some hot pies? Pitying the girls, Mallory suggested. You want them with potatoes or sweet, with jam. But Angelique knew her flock too well. Some young ladies would not even eat oysters. Better make us some tea, Mallory, she asked. Well, what's the matter, girls? We've all got telephones. Back home at the boarding house, you can't get off the internet. Here you can chat as much as you want. Books, embroidery. We could have some kind of contest. Songs, for example. Oh, don't do that, please. Lucy arched her eyebrows as if she had a headache. All these efforts, I'll cheer myself up. It's like a bad mass entertainer. Eventually, we scattered to our rooms, realizing it was going to be damp and cold. Maybe the Count used to build a fireplace here in this weather. Now all that was left was to wrap themselves in blankets and go to the kitchen for tea again and again. Some of the girls had gone to bed early, and there were some who could sleep all day long. But in Nancy and Natalie's room, there was a whole bunch of them. They played cards for a while, then got bored. They were going to ask Lucia to bring a guitar, but they changed their minds. Angelica loves it when they play. Now she'll come, Selena expressed her apprehension, and she'll sit with us all evening. And now let's sing this one, and let's sing that one. Nobody wanted to organize a concert of bardic songs by request. And look in the internet about this Count, suddenly asked Lucy. We went here just vacation in the nature, while everywhere COVID, away from infection. And here, people talk about everything. These local legends. You don't want to believe them out of the blue. You feel like a fool. Nellie's ears perked up. At first, she thought it strange that Lucy had made this request of the cynical Nancy, who saw mysticism only from the point of view of fun. Later she'd learned that Ira was an ace at computers and the World Wide Web, and even from a smartphone she could get things out that other girls couldn't find. Nancy didn't seem to heed the request. She was lying on the bed with her foot on her leg, and her narrow foot in a knitted striped sock was swaying not far from Nellie's. But the telephone was in Nancy's hand, as indeed it was in everyone's. The girls had gotten so comfortable with their cell phones that it never even occurred to anyone to leave a smartphone in the room. Suddenly, Nancy gave a little whistle. Did you find something? Selena asked. Well, girls, just a grim fairy tale. What did you find? Selena settled herself against Nancy's headboard, and she turned the screen slightly toward her. Nellie approached quietly, peering over Selena's shoulder. I found it on a local history website. Of course, fairy tales. There's a group here engaged in anomalous phenomena. So, what? The Count of the Green Men is going to be? No, Mother. But look at the good company he's in. Look at the titles of the articles. There's the one about the meteorite that fell into the lake here. There's the one about an underground passage under the lake, and it's actually the esophagus of some huge ancient mammal. Fossilized, of course. Now get the Count. He's so handsome, even his portrait is preserved. All the girls huddled around Nancy. Nellie didn't need to look. She knew who she was going to see. The same face that had been split in two by the play of light, luminous, pale on one side and drowning in darkness on the other. Girls, Is he stoned or something? Naomi asked uncertainly. Look at him, rolling his eyes. It's possible, Nancy nodded. And they say he's going underground. That means… What? I've read it. All the locals have known for a long time, I'm talking about the 19th century, that there are minerals here, and lots of them. A lot of them is when there is a deposit. But the authorities were in no hurry to start mining. If gold and diamonds were one thing, but with iron ore, they didn't bother. It was a remote place. It was a long way to start from scratch. But when this Count Pal arrived, the locals thought at first that he would do it. He'll start mining, build a factory. Some rejoiced. He would hire local men to work. Those who regretted. What did people live here before? Hunting, fishing, berries, mushrooms, honey. And now, they say, they'll use up the forest and build roads. And Pal had a great company, a mining engineer, then a servant with one eye. He was the Count's right-hand man. And they called in the local sorcerer. What they asked him about some caves, about underground passages. The sorcerer didn't tell the locals anything. He waved his hand. I can't do it. And it won't end well for the Count. It's not something he's taken a swing at, what a man is allowed to do. When the sorcerer returned from the estate, he became a hermit. He wouldn't let anyone in, locked himself up at night with 3 locks. And what was he needed for? Lucy raised her thin eyebrows again. It was the 19th century. Christianity was long ago. There was a church in the village. He could heal toothache, stop bleeding, perform various reversals, and people came to him. I see, stretched Natalie. In short, he was like that grandmother, who at the icon of the Last Judgment, the devil put a candle to the devil. She said she had to have a little man in hell. You don't know where you'll end up when you die. And then the sorcerer left, Nancy said, and they say he whispered to a fellow villager in farewell that it was impossible to stay here now, because he had found the place where you can pass from the world of the dead to the world of the living. It's all on blood, he said, and he'll soon suck your blood. The locals thought that the old man had gone mad. That's why he left the place. And then there was this whole missing girls thing. Brothers Grimm, I told you from the beginning, and you saved me. Nellie continued, please don't think I'm like him, like my father. In a little while, I'll be out of school and out of the family. I've never felt warmth from my dad. He's always been a stranger to me. I'll get on my feet and look for my mom. It's hard when you don't have a soulmate in your life, isn't it? Michael held Nellie's thin hand and hesitated to let go. He felt that in his heart he really had no malice toward this girl. He just looked at her, and it was hard for him to look away. And you saved me. Nellie continued, please don't think I'm like him, like my father. In a little while, I'll be out of school and out of the family. I've never felt warmth from my dad. He's always been a stranger to me. I'll get on my feet and look for my mom. It's hard when you don't have a soulmate in your life, isn't it? Michael held Nellie's thin hand and hesitated to let go. He felt that in his heart he really had no malice toward this girl. He just looked at her, and it was hard for him to look away.